Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Naruto refuses Toad contract part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. October 10th, 334 Northeast, Ninja Era. 6:30 p.m. Kanahigaku no Sato, the village hidden in the leaves, Konoha General Hospital. Minato Namikaze, the fourth Hokage and soon-to-be new father, paced back and forth in the hallway, his body tense and full of nervous energy. His famous overcoat with stylized flames licking the bottom edge and the words "Fourth Hokage" written in large, bold letters on the back swirled around his feet as he moved. Every few seconds he threw a worried glance at the hospital doors that led to the room where his wife was currently in labor. He desperately wanted to do something, but knew that he would just get in the way. Tsunade-sama was overseeing the birth, after all. If something happened that she couldn't handle, there was little he would be able to do. It didn't stop him from imagining such scenarios, however, each more horrible and unlikely, he told himself firmly, than the last. Hokage-sensei, there's no need to worry so much. Kushina-sama is strong, I'm sure she'll be fine. Tsunade-sama won't let anything happen to her, after all. Kakashi said lazily, never taking his eyes off his ever-present orange book. His silver hair stuck straight up in the air, defying gravity as it always did. His mask-covered face seemed to be smiling as he giggled to himself. Minato threw Kakashi an irritated glance, but he stopped pacing for the moment. Why do you insist on calling me that? It sounds ridiculous, he snapped. Kakashi looked up from his book for a moment, and even through the mask Minato thought he could see a grin on his face. You are the Hokage and my teacher, after all. It's only proper. With that said, he turned back to his book, giggling again. The Hokage sighed. Thanks for trying to distract me, but you're plenty worried yourself. You've been reading that same page for the last 30 minutes. Kakashi stiffened in surprise, then shook his head. It's a good page, he insisted. Minato let out a snort of laughter, then paused. Which page? The masked ninja was definitely grinning this time as he opened his mouth to answer. Before he could, however, an unearthly roar reverberated throughout the hospital hallway, rattling windows and stopping the two shinobi cold. The roar was more than just loud, more than just sound even. It was laced with an incredibly potent chakra, and just feeling it nearly brought them to their knees. The roar felt terrifying, it felt overwhelmingly powerful, it felt evil. Minato recovered first, and quickly grabbed Kakashi's shoulder. With a yellow flash of light they both disappeared as shouts began to ring out throughout the hospital. A few minutes before. Makai, the Demon Realm. The Kyubi no Yuko lay before the swirling vortex that was the portal to the human realm, waiting patiently. Barren plains stretched out all around him, silent and desolate. His 9 tails swayed lazily behind him, moving seemingly at random, stirring the air and creating dust clouds as they moved. Soon the period of his banishment would be over. Soon, very soon, he would enter the human realm once more. He had waited 100 years for this moment, 100 years of bitter, frustrated anger, 100 years of planning. 100 years of wondering what had become of his brethren. 100 years since those pathetic humans wielding their silly little powers had dared to turn against him. When they had launched their attack, he had been amused. Amused that they were so arrogant as to believe that mere humans, even working together, could ever hope to so much as inconvenience a Bijou. Then they had revealed the full extent of their plan, and summoned the death god. He laughed outright at that. They apparently believed that demons such as he were mortal, and thus could be killed in such a manner. Fools. He was shocked when he was sealed into a human child. He had not thought the human's plan would work even to that extent. His shock quickly turned to rage, and he flooded the seal containing him with all his power, seeking to break free and wreak havoc upon those who would dare stand against him. His power quickly overwhelmed the seal, as he had expected. What he had not expected was to be forcibly ripped from the human realm and sent back to the demon realm immediately after that occurred. He had barely had time to witness the devastation unleashed by the shattering of the seal before he had been banished. While satisfied that he had killed the humans involved in the attack, he did not feel victorious. For a time, he assumed that the humans would soon banish his brethren as well, if they had not already done so. He wanted to confer with the others before returning to the human world and had sent emissaries to the other tribes calling for a meeting. After a year had passed without any sign of them in the demon realm and without any word through their tribes, he had been forced to consider that the sealing array had been meant for some other purpose. Whatever the humans had failed to accomplish in their attack on him had apparently succeeded elsewhere. His brethren were still in the human realm and lacked both the means to communicate and the power to move freely between the realms. Then had come the unwelcome discovery that the death god had sealed the portal against him. With bitter clarity, he now recalled the words the death god had spoken to the human summoner, words he had dismissed as unimportant at the time, banished from the human realm for a period of 100 years. Thus is the agreement. He was pulled from his reminiscence as he felt the portal change, the feeling of the death god's power fading away as if it had never been. With a victorious roar, he leapt to his feet and bounded through the portal, fully intent on finding his brethren, and exacting revenge on the humans who would dare interfere with the Bija. 6:35 p.m. Konoha's western wall. Minato landed on the outer walls of the village, already scanning the surroundings for the source of that terrible roar. Kakashi landed next to him, looking vaguely ill but alert. His headband was already pushed up, revealing a madly spinning Sharingan eye. All around them other ninja were appearing on the wall, confused shouts coming from all sides as everyone tried to get a handle on the situation. Minato's voice cut through the din, strong and clear. Silence. Did anyone see the source of that roar? All the ninja, even the ones originally stationed on the wall, shook their heads. Minato frowned even as his eyes kept scanning in all directions. There was no sign of any disturbance, no smoke, no chakra emanations that he could detect. He began snapping orders to the ninja assembled around him. Within moments, squads were spreading throughout the village to check for any damage, while others were heading for the other posts to see if they had detected anything. Given the lack of physical evidence, they had to consider the possibility of a widespread genjutsu. This might have been a preliminary test by enemy ninja hoping to find any holes in village security. It could also be relatively harmless harassment, but none of them believed they were that lucky. Sarutobi appeared a few moments later clad in his battle armor and looking every inch the veteran shinobi. Minato felt a little pride when Sarutobi nodded approvingly at him. His predecessor was clearly pleased to see that Minato had responded so quickly and effectively. Minato, what he began to ask, but his voice cut off abruptly as his face paled and his eyes widened in horror. Minato turned quickly to follow his gaze and felt his own face go pale. Miles away yet still clearly visible stood a large form, glowing orange as the sun slowly set behind it. He sent chakra to his eyes, sharpening his sight as best he could. With his enhanced vision, he could just make out the form of something akin to a fox, towering hundreds of feet above the trees. His heart nearly stopped when he saw that there were 9 flowing tails spread out behind the fox. Dear Kamiya-tailed beast. 9 tails, he whispered, his voice hoarse with fear. It had been nearly 30 years since the last tailed beast sighting, the 4-tailed gorilla in IWA. The beast had battled the ninja forces of IWA for nearly 2 days, laying waste to the countryside with its lava. Countless ninja had lost their lives battling the creature, and some areas in IWA still had not recovered. Legends said that the more tails such a beast possessed, the more powerful it was. If the 4-tailed beast could do so much damage to IWA, he shuddered to think how much damage this one could do, especially if it reached the village. Konoha was the only great village to have escaped the ravages of the tailed beasts. Their good fortune had helped them flourish beyond any other village, but it seemed their luck had finally run out. His mind raced, trying to remember everything he had ever heard about how to combat a tailed beast. The one thing all the reports agreed on was that the beasts were effectively immortal. No one had ever managed to kill one, or even seriously wound one, in all the battles that had taken place. Whether it was possible at all was a source of long-standing debate. Still, everyone agreed, however reluctantly, that such a feat was beyond the power of any ninja, no matter how powerful or numerous. The only successful strategy was Fuinjutsu, specifically containment seals tied to a living host. There were rumors that Suna had managed to contain the one-tailed beast into an object for a time, but the container had failed within a week and unleashed the beast to once again ravage Wind Country. No other tailed beast had ever been sealed into an inanimate object that he knew of. The reports he had heard also suggested that the younger the host, the better. Several adult ninja and even a few teenagers had been selected as hosts, only to have their bodies swiftly begin to break down under the strain. They had died and the beasts were released or resealed within a year at most. Further complicating matters, the containment seal used had to be of sufficient power relative to the tailed beast it would contain. The seal holding back the one-tailed beast had proven wholly insufficient when the village hidden in the grass had attempted to use it on the 3-tailed beast. That failed attempt and the disastrous aftermath had weakened the grass village to such an extent that it was still trying to recover over 50 years later. Minato's mind swiftly sorted through all the information he had available and determined the best course of action. To seal the 9-tailed beast, he would have to use the strongest seal possible on the youngest container possible. He already has a seal in mind, one which summoned the god of death itself. He had been researching it out of curiosity, wondering what would lead someone to design such a seal that cost the life of its user. He supposed he knew the answer to that question now, though he wished he did not. As for the host, a child that was newly born would be the best. A child that was born today, such as. His mind shied away from following that thought to its conclusion. He snapped out of its musings when he heard Sarutobi call for him again. Minato, Sarutobi said sharply. You need to begin the evacuation. Minato shook himself and nodded. He drew in a slow breath, then spoke. I need volunteers to slow the beast's advance. The remaining ninja and anyone of genin rank will begin evacuating the civilians as quickly as possible. Sarutobi, I need you to organize the resistance. His voice trailed off for a moment as his mind grappled with what he was about to do, what he was about to sacrifice. I need to prepare for the sealing, he finished quietly. Sarutobi nodded his acceptance. Unsurprisingly, every ninja on the wall volunteered to delay the beast. Minato smiled. It was a sad smile, but proud all the same. Thank you all. It has been an honor to lead you. With a yellow flash, he was gone. Minato reappeared in his lab and immediately rushed to his work table. The seal to summon the power of the god of death was already spread out on the table, right where he had left it. The notes he had managed to pull together after weeks of exhaustive research lay off to the side. That information, beyond the requirements for using the seal itself, didn't even fill a page. He reviewed his own notes, realizing that he had made very little progress in understanding the underlying mechanics of the sealing array. The most useful piece of information was a scribbled note on the back of the sealing scroll. It wasn't by the original author, the handwriting was clearly different, but it contained more information than all the journals he had scoured to this point. The first test of the seal was successful, but too costly. The target was sealed, but when we lowered the protective barrier, Kenichi was dead. We examined the body but found no discernible cause of death. It seems that the god of death is not to be summoned lightly. Minato had been unable to determine what they had tested the seal on, or even who had written the note. Nonetheless, it was confirmation that the strongest seal design he had ever seen worked. He would just have to hope it was enough to contain the nine-tailed beast. He rolled up the design for the sealing array along with his brushes and inks, then disappeared in another yellow flash. 7:20 p.m. Konoha General Hospital. Tsunade gently handed the bundle containing Kushina's newborn son to the exhausted mother, smiling at the look of joy upon Kushina's face. Kushina looked haggard, her hair sticking to her sweaty face and her clothing rumpled and stained, but Tsunade thought she had never looked happier in her life. Have you settled on a name yet? She asked. Shizen, Tsunade's apprentice and assistant, looked on with a smile, wiping away a happy tear. Naruto, Kushina said. She moved her hand and gently smoothed back the small tufts of golden hair that decorated the baby's head. His name is Naruto. Tsunade and Shizen smiled fondly, glancing at each other in amusement as they wondered if the name was supposed to mean fish cake or maelstrom, though they would never say it. They thought either meaning equally likely considering Minato and Kushina's shared love of ramen. Tsunade shook herself as she collected her thoughts. Right. You are stable, Naruto is healthy, and everything is fine here. I hate to leave so soon, but something is happening outside and Shizen and I need to be out there to help. We'll be back as soon as we can. Kushina tensed as her senses, previously overwhelmed by the agony of childbirth, finally detected the ongoing battle. She nodded quickly, holding Naruto a little tighter as she wondered what was happening outside. 7:30 p.m. 2 miles west of Konoha. The Kyuubi flicked his tail, and 3 more ninja died. Mindful of the events that led to his banishment, he dispatched any attackers quickly and efficiently. Though it amused him to watch the humans expend their energy attempting to harm him, they had proven that they could inconvenience him, if allowed the opportunity. There was no real reason to stay in the area anyway, as he had already determined that there was no trace of Yuki within 100 miles. Still, he wasn't about to ignore the fact that these humans had attacked him unprovoked. They had clearly forgotten just why the Bijou were to be feared. It seemed a little reminder was in order before he resumed his search. The Kyuubi opened his mouth, and began to gather Yuki into a large ball that filled the space between his gaping jaws. Even as the Yuki grew denser and denser, he could feel the humans gathering in one area, roughly a mile away and some distance from the village. It seemed they were planning to attack him en masse. The Kyuubi would have smirked, if the ball of energy would have allowed it. After a few more seconds of gathering Yuki, he closed his jaws around the ball, completely encasing it. Same time. Konoha's western wall. Sarutobi gripped the wall tightly, his knuckles white and his face grim. They had succeeded in delaying the beast, giving Minato precious minutes to prepare the sealing array that would hopefully stop the beast once and for all. They had succeeded, but the death toll was horrifying. Over 100 ninja, from Chunin to Jounin, were already dead, and he feared many more would follow if Minato did not arrive soon. Desperate for any option that would not result in further loss of life, he had directed his teammates Koharu and Hamura to gather ninja in a clearing outside the village to prepare for a large-scale ninjutsu. They were to split the ninja into groups based on elemental affinity, and by now nearly 200 ninjas should be pouring their chakra into joint elemental dragon techniques. This plan of attack was sound in theory, but he was unsure if the dragons would have any impact on the tailed beast despite their considerable power. All their other techniques, including individual versions of the dragon technique, had proven largely ineffective. On the other hand, while they may not be doing any discernible damage, the tailed beast was at least treating them as threats if the way it swiftly destroyed any ninja who came near it was any indication. Hopefully this long-range attack would slow it down without costing any more ninja their lives. He squinted his eyes, watching as the Kyuubi began gathering energy into a ball in front of its mouth. He'd never heard of a tailed beast using this sort of attack before, but the amount of chakra gathered into the orb was staggering, and still growing at an alarming rate. All the ninja approaching the beast scattered immediately, but the beast made no move to attack, instead continuing to gather more chakra into the orb. Whatever it was trying to do, it seemed very slow and highly ineffective. Then the beast swallowed the whole thing. Sarutobi blinked, trying to figure out what the point of. The blast that issued forth from the beast's maw was nearly blinding in its intensity. He let out a yell of pain as he covered his eyes, and felt a wall of heat slam into him, searing his skin. He was nearly blown off his feet, but quickly recovered and tried to determine what happened, forcing his eyes open and ignoring the pain with practiced ease. A trench nearly half a mile wide and several miles long had been carved into the landscape. What had once been a lush, verdant forest was now a smoking ruin, every trace of life obliterated by the nine-tailed beast's blast. At the edges of the trench, trees had been torn from the ground and flung back, and fires were raging for hundreds of feet on either side. Sarutobi gaped. If that blast had been pointed at Konoha, half the city would have been destroyed. As it was, a huge swath of the forest surrounding the village had just been obliterated in a single attack. He could only thank Kami that the beast had such terrible aim. Judging by the trench the attack had left behind, it hadn't even come close to. He gasped, and his face took on a look of horror as he mentally traced the path of the blast. It ran straight through the clearing where the ninja had gathered to fuel the elemental dragon techniques. Now there was no sign of the clearing, and no sign of any shinobi that had been in it. Sarutobi prayed Minato completed his preparations quickly. He didn't think they would be able to hold out much longer. 7:45 p.m. Konoha General Hospital. Minato barely managed to choke out the words "I'm sorry" before he disappeared from the hospital room. 7:50 p.m. Konoha's Western Wall. Sarutobi, gather all available ninja and prepare to power a barrier technique around the beast, Minato called out as soon as he appeared beside the former Hokage. I need you to keep it contained so I can perform the sealing. Throw this inside the barrier just before you activate it. Minato tossed one of his signature three-pronged kunai to the old man and disappeared. Sarutobi caught the kunai easily and nodded grimly. He had seen the bundle in Minato's arms, and had a fairly good idea which child he would be using as the container for the tailed beast. He just hoped they could hold out long enough to activate the barrier. 7:55 p.m. 2 miles west of Konoha. The Kyuubi laughed quietly as he felt the humans circling around him, spread out evenly yet keeping their distance. After he had unleashed the menacing ball on their little gathering, all the attacks had ceased. He even waited for several minutes to see if they would respond, reveling in their terror. A few more deaths, perhaps another menacing ball, and the lesson would be firmly planted in their minds. Still, he really should stop playing around with the humans, he mused. His initial anger at their attack had rapidly cooled with every human he killed, and now he felt more bored and impatient than anything. After a few more moments' contemplation, he decided that one last attack should suffice, then he could move on to his real objective. He began to gather power for another menacing ball, this one aimed at the next highest concentration of humans with their odd power. For some reason, they were gathering within a mountain, behind what appeared to be human faces carved into the side. Were they expecting to hide from him now, after they had attacked him at first sight? He stopped, the menacing balls swiftly dissipating, when the barrier snapped into place around him. This was disturbingly familiar. Then a giant toad appeared in a cloud of smoke. That was new. It had been a long time since he battled anything from the outer realm, and given the outcome from the last time, he was surprised one dared show its face in front of him. Then he detected the two humans on the toad's head, one adult, with the largest concentration of energy in his body he had felt since his return, and a tiny child. He quickly grew alarmed as he realized just what was happening. 8:00 p.m. inside the barrier. I just need you to keep the beast occupied while I complete the jutsu. Buy me some time, Bunta! Minato cried out, his hands flashing through seals so fast they appeared to be indistinct blurs. The bundle containing Naruto was nestled between his feet holding the bundle on Gamabunta's back as he anchored himself with chakra. Even as Minato finished speaking, the fox-like beast snarled and shot forward, tails swinging in from all angles to strike at the giant toad. Minato's knees almost buckled as Gamabunta shot into the air to avoid the strikes, but his hands never stopped moving. That's easy for you to say, brat, Gamabunta called out, leaping into the air to dodge yet another strike. He pulled out his tanto to block, and the blade rattled in his hands as the beast's tail slammed into it repeatedly. This thing is strong and fast. Shit, its tail. The rest of his words were cut off in a scream of pain as the beast's claws raked across his face. One of its tails had wrapped around each of Gamabunta's arms, and another was currently wrenching the giant tanto out of his hands. Its claws were raised for another strike when it suddenly froze. A chill seemed to permeate the air, and even Gamabunta shivered as he felt something ancient and inexplicably other descend upon the battlefield. The beast's terrifying presence and seemingly limitless power paled in comparison to this feeling, and for a brief moment Minato wondered if he had only managed to make the situation worse. Minato watched silently as the presence seemed to coalesce in the space in front of him, hovering in the air between the tailed beast and Gamabunta. It appeared exactly as he had imagined, a skeletal figure clad in tattered black robes, a scythe gripped loosely in one bony hand. The boundary is sufficient, the vessel prepared. What shall be sealed? The death god asked, its voice echoing oddly within the barrier. Just hearing it sent tremors of pain throughout Minato's body. He worked his throat several times before he could force the words out. He had imagined many times what actually being in the presence of the god of death would be like. This coldness, this creeping emptiness that flowed from his extremities into the core of his body was far less than he had imagined, and yet somehow far, far worse. I want you to take the tailed beast's soul to your realm and seal its power into my son, he said quickly, hoping to finish his task before he lost his composure entirely. He knew the price he would pay for summoning the god of death, and he was as prepared as he could be. At this point he just wanted it to be over. He spared a moment to wonder what the death god meant by the boundary being sufficient. There had been no specific mention of a boundary in the notes he had read, though he did recall that the test was performed inside a barrier. He had assumed it to be a standard precaution, but perhaps it was something more? The death god paused, then shifted its head slightly and looked at Minato. The Hokage's entire body convulsed, and he barely managed to avoid landing on Naruto as he fell to his knees, gasping. Demonkind do not fall within death's domain, the death god intoned. Minato paled. What? But... The death god spoke again, ignoring Minato. The Kyubi no Yuko shall be sealed within the designated vessel for as long as the vessel is capable of enduring. Upon the failure of the vessel, the Kyubi no Yuko shall be banished once again from the human realm for a period of 100 years. Thus is the agreement. Minato tried to protest, to ask why, but he found himself unable to speak. Then the death god moved. He vaguely heard Naruto begin to cry behind him, but his limbs seemed so heavy. His entire body was cold, now, and was swiftly growing numb. He thought Gamabunta was shouting something, but it seemed distant and terribly unimportant. The beast reacted with incredible speed as the death god stretched forth its hand, but even as it leapt into the air to gain distance, its body began to distort. The red energy that comprised its very being was inexorably pulled through the air, twisting and turning until it formed a vortex of power centered over the newborn child. A funnel stretched downward and connected to the seal written upon Naruto's stomach, and the entire vortex was slowly pulled into the seal. Naruto was screaming in pain, the sound ripping at Minato's ears and seeming to fill his entire world even as his vision grew dim. The entire process took less than a minute, but to Minato it felt like an eternity. The sealing is complete. All within death's domain and the boundaries shall be taken in payment. Thus is the agreement, the death god intoned. There was a moment of stillness, then the otherworldly presence vanished from the battlefield. His attention was suddenly diverted to the ground, where the previously green grass, what remained of it after the damage Gamabunta and the beast had done to the landscape, was swiftly turning brown. The leaves were dropping from the trees in torrents, the exposed wood turning gray and crumbling. Even as Minato's vision faded entirely, his mind churned, trying to process what the death god had said. Something was wrong with that statement. Something was. As the life faded from his eyes and his body stilled, he never noticed that Naruto had stopped crying. October 10th, 334 Northeast, Ninja Era. 8:00 p.m. 2 miles west of Konoha, site of the Kyubi sealing, inside the barrier. Kushu, more commonly known as the nine-tailed demon fox or even just the nine tails, was not annoyed. Nor was he upset. He was far beyond such pale words. He was furious. He had been sealed again. Sealed. Again. He wanted nothing more than to flood all his power through the seal and into his vessel to destroy it. He wanted to stomp out every last human life so that none would again dare inflict this indignity upon him. He wanted to scorch the land such that nothing would ever grow and every being in the human realm would realize the price for meddling with the Kyubi no Yuko. He wanted to. Felt his yuki churning as his emotions ran wild, and knew that he was a mere moment away from giving in to his desires and releasing his full power. Even as his fury burned hotter, he forced his yuki to calm. He remembered all too well what happened the last time he gave in to his baser instincts, though only now that he was sealed again did he fully understand the circumstances. That pathetic human had attempted to steal his power using the assistance of the god of death, and this was the result. Kusha played the death god's words back through his mind. The Kyubi no Yuko shall be sealed within the designated vessel for as long as the vessel is capable of enduring. Upon the failure of the vessel, the Kyubi no Yuko shall be banished once again from the human realm for a period of 100 years. Thus is the agreement. The designated vessel was clearly the human child, just as it had been 100 years ago. The question was, what constituted failure of the vessel? He was fairly certain he had completely obliterated the vessel the last time, along with the surrounding countryside, so his previous experience wouldn't be useful for the sake of comparison. He had only spent a brief time within the seal of the death god before, so he had not really paid attention to its appearance. This time, he paused to take in his surroundings. He was standing in the middle of an empty white room, large enough to comfortably contain his battle form. The room had 4 walls, each with a metal door set in the middle. The doors were large, but the tops only reached halfway up his legs. He looked up, but could make out nothing, no ceiling, no sky, just endless white. He moved to one of the doors, noting that it was currently closed. Upon closer inspection he could see that the door appeared to be fashioned of steel, as he would expect of human fortifications. Such objects were of incredible strength by human standards, after all. He checked for any sort of locking mechanism or handle, but found nothing. Experimentally, he lashed out with his claws and struck the door. He expected some sort of reaction, an energy barrier of some sort, or perhaps a physical sensation of resistance. He most certainly did not expect his claw to tear through the door as if it were made of mere wood. Surprised, Kusha paused to observe his surroundings. Other than the gaping hole in the door there was no change. Grinning, he began to condense his yuki in order to reduce the size of his current form so he could fit through the door. He received another surprise, this one rather unpleasant, when the door began to shrink along with him. When he had reduced himself to only a few feet tall, the door stood barely 6 inches high. The rest of the room had become smaller as well, so much so that he could easily stretch out his tails and touch the opposite wall. Changing his approach, Kushu instead extended one of his tails through the open door and let his form dissolve into a mass of churning yuki. As the yuki passed through the opening, however, it began to grow even smaller. Even worse, the smaller the opening was, the harder it was for more yuki to leave the room. When he flexed his yuki to make the opening larger, the entire room shook and small cracks began appearing in the walls. He stopped flexing immediately, and watched as the cracks slowly began to seal themselves. He also noted that the opening had grown ever so slightly larger. Storing that away for future reference, he turned his attention to the yuki that was outside the room. As a being comprised entirely of yuki, the stream of energy outside the room was as much himself as the mass of yuki inside the room was. What he found outside the room was troubling, to say the least. He could sense with surprising clarity the state of the child he was sealed into. He could discern the various organs, the pathways through which blood flowed, and even the outlines of what appeared to be paths for chakra, as the humans called their power. He had never been concerned with the particulars of human physiology, or any other living creature for that matter, but he knew enough in general to understand that the various organs were supposed to be doing something. Currently, none of the organs were working. The heart was not beating, the blood was not flowing, the chakra was not moving. Actually, that wasn't quite true. As his yuki moved throughout the body, the nearby organs reacted. The heart started to beat again, and the blood started to flow. Even the chakra reacted, circulating throughout the body, some of it even moving closer to the yuki and curling around it. Whenever that happened, it caused a strange tingling sensation that Kushu had never felt before. The chakra would always settle down when he moved away from it, so he decided to ignore it for the time being. Kushu withdrew his yuki as much as possible while still being able to sense the child's body, and watched. Without his yuki, the body quickly shut down again. He waited for several seconds, watching for any activity anywhere within the body. Nothing happened. It took him another few seconds to realize what the problem was. but when he did, a wave of panic shot through him. The child was dead. He was certain the child had been alive prior to the sealing, so either the sealing process itself, or the presence of the death god had cost the child its life. Kushu braced himself, certain that he would be sent back to Makai, again, any moment now. Several more seconds passed, but nothing happened. Confusion swept through him, and he went over the death god's words once more. Perhaps failure of the vessel referred to the destruction of the physical body, rather than the death of the child's soul? If so, Kushu began to laugh as he sent as much yuki as possible out of the room, spreading it throughout the child's body. Same time. Outside the barrier. Sarutobi stared helplessly at the barrier, vainly trying to see through the opaque bubble that enclosed his successor and the tailed beast. All around him, hundreds of ninja were pouring all their available chakra into the technique, fueling what was easily the largest barrier he had ever seen. He wouldn't be surprised if it was nearly half a mile in diameter. Now that he had nothing to do but wait, he found himself reflecting bitterly on the many mistakes he had made in the last 2 hours. He had sent far too many ninja on what amounted to a suicide mission, and he wondered even now if their deaths had accomplished anything at all. The rational side of himself knew that they had all volunteered, and he was proud of them all for their will of fire, but the guilt weighed heavily on his soul. It was a familiar guilt, and while these new burdens had plenty of company, that did not make them any easier to bear. But the worst burden of all, outweighing even the moment he had realized just how far his favorite student had fallen, was waiting inside that barrier. He had realized shortly after Minato turned over command of the battle what he intended to do. He had known of Minato and Jiraiya's research into the Death God's seal, had even contributed some of the journals from his personal library. He just wished that he knew enough about sealing to do it himself. Minato was the most promising shinobi he had ever met, and even now he grew stronger and stronger. Minato had a wife who had just given birth and a son who should be able to enjoy life with both parents. Now that would never happen. Sarutobi was drawn out of his musings as he noticed several ninja collapsing as they succumbed to chakra exhaustion. The genin and support ninja who lacked the necessary reserves to fuel the barrier moved in to assist them, but Sarutobi could see that more and more ninja would be dropping soon. Even the experienced jounin looked shaky and pale from the chakra drain. He weighed his options at this point. He could send in fresh ninja and mandate the use of soldier pills and the 8 gates, for those capable of it, to extend the duration of the barrier. Such a course could cause irreparable damage to the ninja involved and would likely still only gain them another minute or 2. On the other hand, he could drop the barrier now, while most of his forces still had some power left and could assist in the battle. Given the fourth plan, it was likely that matters within the barrier were already settled, one way or another. Nodding sharply, he made his decision. Attention all ninja! On my signal you are to drop the barrier and prepare to engage the tailed beast. His voice rang out. He could see the ninja around him gather themselves, determination warring with fear in their faces. He waited a few more seconds, then shouted, "Now!" The barrier flickered, then disappeared completely. Sarutobi himself led the charge into the now revealed clearing, only to falter as he surveyed the scene before him. The tailed beast was nowhere in sight. He could see evidence of a battle, as claw marks so large they might as well have been trenches were scattered throughout the area, and he could see impressions in the ground caused by Gamabunta leaping about. Gamabunta himself stood in the center of the clearing, eyes closed and head bowed. His sword was sheathed and his pipe was stuck through his belt. Blood dripped from jagged wounds across his face and head, but the giant toad paid them no heed. Sarutobi moved forward to question Gamabunta, but his attention was suddenly diverted to the top of Gamabunta's head as a flare of chakra suddenly appeared. It was far weaker than what he had felt earlier in the day, but still unmistakably the tailed beast's chakra. He could also make out a baby crying at the top of its lungs. When he performed a shunshin to the top of Gamabunta's head, he found the chakra already receding back into the baby, leaving no visible mark that it had been there at all. The child continued to cry insistently until Sarutobi finally picked him up, at which point he quieted under the gentle rocking and quickly drifted off to sleep. He finally turned his attention to the figure lying nearby. Minato's eyes were still open, even in death, and his face was pale and drawn. The expression on his face was heart-wrenching. The pain and guilt he felt in his final moments was obvious. Sarutobi slowly knelt beside Minato's body, and reached out with one shaking hand to close his eyes. He could feel tears streaming down his face, but he just let them flow. He pulled off his long scarf and laid it across Minato's head, then moved back down to the ground. He paused on his way down to speak into Gamabunta's ear. "I would like to ask you about what happened inside the barrier, but I need to see to the village first. Can Jiraiya talk to you later?" Gamabunta gave a slight nod, his head still bowed in sorrow. The moment he arrived at Gamabunta's feet, he was surrounded by anxious ninja. None could voice their questions aloud, but their concerns were plain to see. Some were eyeing the bundle in Sarutobi's arms curiously, while a few were clearly already drawing conclusions about what had happened within the barrier. Sarutobi scanned the crowd and soon spotted Kakashi's distinct shock of white hair. Kakashi. Though his voice was low, it rang out in the silent clearing as if he had shouted. Please select 3 other ninja to serve as Minato's honor bearers. Our Sarutobi's voice broke from grief, but he forced the rest of the words out. Our 4th Hokage has fallen in battle. 9:00 p.m. Konoha, Hokage's office. Tsunade-chan, thank you for coming so quickly, Sarutobi said. He smiled slightly, but kept his attention on the bundle in his arms. Well, whatever you need me for, just make it quick. I need to get back to the hospital. We've got a lot of injured ninjas still, not to mention all the ones with severe chakra exhaustion, Tsunade said quickly. She was looking around his office in irritation, so it actually took her a few moments to realize what he was holding in his arms. Is that a baby? Sarutobi chuckled. I'm glad to see your skills haven't dulled over the years. This is indeed a baby. A very special baby, in fact. Tsunade growled under her breath, but moved closer, correctly assuming that she was summoned to check on the child's health. She froze a few steps away, and then called out in shock, Naruto? Sarutobi nodded to himself, Tsunade's exclamation all the confirmation he needed that, as he had expected, this was indeed Minato's son. So they did go with Naruto for his name after all. I thought they would. Old monkey, why is Kushina and Minato's kid here? Actually, where's Minato? Sarutobi finally turned his face towards her, and she was shocked to see his reddened eyes and tear-stained cheeks. Here in this office, in front of one of his former students, he let his guard down and allowed his grief to show through. You haven't heard? He asked quietly, genuinely surprised. Tsunade shook her head slowly. All the patients I was working on were in no condition to talk, and I came straight here when the ANBU summoned me. What haven't I heard? She tried to ignore the foreboding feeling that had settled firmly in her gut, and the echo of long-dead voices that were never far from her thoughts. Minato sacrificed himself to seal away the tailed beast. Given the beast's power, the only option was to seal it away into a child, the younger the better. I suspected he had chosen his own son as the vessel, and you have just confirmed that for me, Sarutobi said softly, turning back to look at Naruto again. His wrinkled hand smoothed back the small tufts of hair on Naruto's head as he continued to rock the baby gently back and forth. Tsunade closed her eyes and bowed her head, quietly absorbing the news. Sacrificing his own life to protect others sounded exactly like something Minato would do. Even as she thought about the 4th Hokage, the faces of Dan and Nawaki, her lover and her younger brother, flashed through her mind. All 3 had dreamed of becoming Hokage and protecting the village, though only Minato had achieved his dream. Dan and Nawaki had both died long before they even had the chance. And now Minato was gone as well. Kushina would be. Tsunade looked up quickly. Does Kushina know? Sarutobi shrugged slightly. I honestly don't know. I sent an ANBU squad to find her first, actually. I assumed she would still be in the hospital, or perhaps back at their house. I expected her to arrive first, in fact. When was the last time you saw her? A few hours ago now, just after Naruto was born. The attack had started in Shizen and I rushed out to see to the wounded. Sarutobi frowned, wondering where Kushina could possibly be. He wouldn't put it past the incredibly stubborn woman to have charged out into the battlefield despite her weakened state, but he had seen no sign of her there, nor had he seen her rather unique style of jutsu. Well, I expect she will arrive before long in any case, he said, recalling the reason he had asked Tsunade to come in the first place. In the meantime, I would like you to look over young Naruto here. Konoha has no experience with ceiling-tailed beasts, so unfortunately we have no idea what to expect as far as his health and development is concerned. I also witnessed the beast's chakra flaring up shortly after the sealing took place, though it hasn't happened since. Tsunade nodded slowly, then stood and made her way over to Sarutobi. She motioned him to place Naruto on the desk, then activated her medical jutsu. The moment she started her skin, she drew back with a low hiss. Sarutobi immediately went tense beside her, but waited for her to speak. Sensei, how is this seal supposed to work? I honestly don't know. Seals were never my area of expertise, that was Jiraiya and Minato's area. I know they've both been researching the seal for months now, so until I hear otherwise I would assume that it is functioning as intended. Why? There are trace amounts of the beast's chakra circulating throughout his entire body. Sarutobi's eyes widened. What? He yelled. Naruto began to fuss as he lay on the desk, and he forced himself to keep his voice quiet. What do you mean circulating? Well, everywhere blood and chakra flow there are also trace amounts of the beast's chakra. She reactivated her jutsu and began scanning again. She continued talking as she did so. It's spread evenly throughout the body, not pooling in any one area that I can detect. It also seems to originate from behind his navel. I assume the seal was placed on his stomach? Over the view gate? She didn't bother to wait for his nod. I can't detect that it's causing any damage or deterioration, though I can't say what the effects will be in the long term. For the moment, I'd say it's actually helping, if anything. Sarutobi relaxed slightly as she spoke. Perhaps this was how the seal was supposed to function. There could certainly be a lot of benefits to having a secondary supply of chakra, though who knew if the beast's chakra worked in the same way as human chakra. In fact, he recalled descriptions of other vessels using powerful and unique techniques in the past, techniques that no one had managed to replicate. Perhaps this was part of the secret. Tsunade frowned suddenly. What the? Sarutobi waited for her to continue, but she remained silent, still frowning. What? What is it? He prompted. If there was some sort of reaction between the beast's chakra and Naruto's chakra, what little of it there is at his age. I've never seen chakra do that. Do what? He was getting rather annoyed at this point, and was on the verge of activating his own technique just to see for himself. Where the two chakras come in direct contact, it sort of vibrates. It doesn't seem to cause any damage or side effects, but how? Why? It vibrates? How in the world does chakra vibrate? Tsunade scowled and deactivated her jutsu. That's the best way I can describe it, alright? When two different chakras interact, they either blend together or repel one another. It's a basic tenet that all medics have to be aware of. I've healed thousands of ninja, and my chakra will either blend with or repel the patient's chakra. Always. She was starting to get worked up now, her face flushing and her voice rising. Medics train for years to learn how to handle the problems that interaction can cause. It's the foundation of modern medical ninjutsu. I have personally done years of research to explain and predict those reactions. I have never in my life seen chakra do that. Naruto started fussing again, louder this time, and Tsunade snapped her mouth shut and turned away, stomping off to fume in the corner while still muttering under her breath. Sarutobi shook his head, torn between amusement at seeing Tsunade so passionate about yet another medical mystery, and worry about what this could mean for Naruto. It was probable that this vibration was due to the beast's chakra rather than something unique to Naruto, but that didn't explain what was happening or why. So other than the oddity with the beast's chakra, he is in perfect health? Sarutobi asked a few minutes later, seeing that Tsunade had calmed down and had moved past her ranting phase and on to her research planning phase. She nodded distractedly. Yeah, he's fine, every bit as good as when he was first born. Glad to hear it. Once Jiraiya gets here, I'll have him check the seal and confirm how it's supposed to work, then Kushina can take him home, or wherever she would like to go. He mentally added a tally of at least 2, or, on further reflection, 4 squads of A and BU to her entourage. He wasn't about to risk losing Minato's wife and child to some enemy ninja who sensed an opportunity in the wake of the tailed beast's attack. He paused, then turned to face Tsunade. She could probably use some company in the days ahead, you know, he hinted not so subtly. Tsunade threw him an irritated glance. If you think I'm about to leave her alone while she's grieving over Minato and adjusting to being a mother, you're even more senile than I thought, old monkey. Sarutobi smiled. Indeed, silly of me to think otherwise. Same time. Gaikai, the Outer Realm, Myobokuzen, Exquisite Tree Mountain. Jiraiya landed nimbly on his feet as the reverse summoning spell ended, having completed its work in bringing him to the home of the Toad Summons. He took a moment to admire the gorgeous scenery around him. Lush forests and thundering waterfalls greeted his eyes wherever he looked. Even the buildings the toads had created had a way of blending into the forests around them. Konoha would always be his first home, but there were times when he was tempted to give up his work as a ninja and live in Myobokuzen. He had fought the temptation thus far, but every year it became just a little bit harder to resist the peaceful allure of this place and continue his work as a ninja. He knew one day, hopefully many years in the future, the toads would summon him to Myobokuzen and he would no longer be able to find it within himself to leave. He shook his head. That day may be coming, but it was not today. Today he was here to learn about the last moments of his last and greatest student, Minato Namikaze, the man who had surpassed his teacher in nearly every respect, the man who had become Hokage before the age of 30, the man who he had hoped would succeed him as the Toad Sage. He greeted the other toads as he made his way to Gamabunta's dwelling. Word had already spread throughout the village of their solemn demeanor, and consoling words were any indication. He let their words wash over him, thankful for their support, but unable to truly face his feelings on the matter at the moment. When he finally entered Gamabunta's home, he found the Toad Chief sitting quietly while his wife applied bandages to his face. Jiraiya was shocked to see that the wounds Gamabunta had taken in the battle with the tailed beast had remained after the summoning ended. That had never happened before, and he hadn't even known that it could happen at all. "How are you still injured?" Jiraiya blurted out. Gamabunta's eyes shifted to stare at Jiraiya. The tailed beast's power is not to be underestimated," he said firmly. Gamabunta then paused uncertainly, struggling to find the words to explain the situation. "Their power is not like the power of humans. Because when the wounds they give us carry over, alright?" Gamabunta finally shouted out, frustrated. Gamabunta's wife Gamatsuchi smacked him on the back of his head, scolding him for moving while she was fixing him. Jiraiya was rather surprised at Gamabunta's reaction to the question, and a little concerned as well. He knew there were secrets that the toads kept from him concerning their own existence, but always before it had seemed like irrelevant details. Now he was certain the toads knew something very important and wanted to tell him, but couldn't. He thought about pressing for details, but his experience fishing for information that the toads didn't want him to have told him that would be a bad idea. He may have signed a contract with them, and he may have their respect and friendship, but there were clear limits. "I see," Jiraiya said slowly, trying to convince himself Gamabunta and Gamatsuchi were not looking at him with pity when he said that. "Well, that's not why I came here. I wanted to learn about what happened inside the barrier. You are the only one who can tell us anything." Gamabunta sighed and nodded, then began relating the events within the barrier from his perspective. When he was finished, Jiraiya looked over the notes he had hastily written down. "All within Death's domain and the barrier, huh? Guess that explains why all the trees and grass were dead, and why the summoner's life is taken. I guess the seal also protects the vessel from this, since Naruto survived the sealing. Makes sense, wouldn't be very useful otherwise," Jiraiya mused. He tapped the pen against his chin as he reviewed what he knew about the Death God's seal. That would explain that third section in the left quadrant. Jiraiya trailed off, mumbling to himself as he assimilated this new information into his knowledge of the seal. Gamabunta shifted uneasily, but said nothing. Jiraiya fell quiet for a time, then looked up at Gamabunta, tears beginning to form in his eyes. Did Minato say anything at the end?" Gamabunta sighed heavily, but shook his head. "No, Jiraiya, he didn't. Knowing him though, I'm sure he left some sort of message behind, but he didn't say anything while I was there. There was no time." Gamabunta fell silent as Jiraiya forced back his tears and nodded slowly. Right. I'm sure he did, yeah," Jiraiya said, wiping his face and taking a long breath. "Well, I need to let Sensei know about all this. Thank you for telling me, Bunta." Jiraiya bowed in thanks, then turned to leave. "Jiraiya," Gamabunta called out quietly. "There's something else you need to know. The great Toad Sage has issued a new prophecy. He says that one of your students shall stand in the path of the vengeful spirit, and that their clash shall reshape the world." Jiraiya felt rage wash over him. "Well, all my students are fucking dead now, aren't they?" The anger left as quickly as it had come, leaving a horrible empty feeling behind. "They're all dead," he finished quietly. He turned and left the building without another word. Gamabunta sadly watched Jiraiya walk away. His last whispered comment barely managed to reach Jiraiya's ears. "You aren't." October 11th, 334 NE. 3:15 a.m. Konoha, Tsunade's residence. Kusha was not annoyed. Despite his success in taking over his vessel and restarting its vital functions, thus ensuring his own continued presence within the human realm, his initial experiments had already uncovered several limitations, even beyond the small amount of Yuki available to him. The very first thing he tried was to extend his Yuki outside the confines of the vessel. It worked, but only to a point. Once his Yuki extended further than 2 feet, it was pulled back towards the vessel. The overall sensation was similar to when the Death God sealed him, but ceased once the Yuki was within the 2-foot boundary. By essentially throwing his Yuki, he could extend this range significantly, but he lost all control of the Yuki until it was inexorably pulled back to him. The sensation when that happened was disturbing as well. He lost all awareness of that part of himself, and when it rejoined his main body there was only a memory of nothingness. He had no desire to experience that further, and refrained from throwing his Yuki again. He hoped that the 2-foot boundary could be extended in the future, but for now his ability to interact with the world was severely limited. His next attempt was to form a solid shell of Yuki around the body, and use that to move around. If it worked, he could emulate his normal movements, if limited in size and scope. This attempt was also successful, but again, only to a point. The amount of yuki he could pour into the shell while still maintaining the body's vital functions was incredibly small at this point, and the shell was paper thin. Kushu was certain that the shell would not withstand even the weakest of attacks from his demon kin. The potential power of the human's chakra was currently unknown, but from what he remembered of the recent battle, any of his attackers would most likely be able to pierce the shell with little difficulty. Further testing was interrupted when the old human appeared and carried him from the battlefield. Kushu felt the body reacting to the warmth and comfort offered by the human, and made another discovery. With his yuki spread throughout the body as it was, he experienced everything the vessel did as though it was his own body. The body also apparently functioned as a living being's would, despite the presence of his yuki. In this case, the body's functioning began to slow, though not to a harmful extent. In fact, this current state required even less yuki to maintain than before. This must be the sleep that corporeal beings experienced. While the body rested, Kushu himself, and more importantly his senses, was unaffected. He couldn't see out of the vessel's eyes as they were currently closed, but all the other senses continued to function. His own innate ability to sense the energies of the world around him was similarly unaffected. So he observed silently as the old human spoke to the other humans, then later wept and ranted in the privacy of his office. Kushu understood the language well enough, but lacked the context to make sense of his words. Kushu filed everything away as potentially useful information anyway. He was stuck in this human vessel for the time being and needed to adapt. Kushu had feared discovery and death when the female human announced the presence of his yuki, though she foolishly called it chakra, as if he were a human, but relaxed when the old human dismissed it as the proper functioning of the seal. For all Kushu knew, the old human could be correct, though he personally suspected otherwise. He also paid close attention to the female's rant about the strange interaction between his yuki and the vessel's chakra. This would merit further study. When the second male arrived, and Kushu decided he really needed to pay attention to names if he was going to pass as human, he listened closely to the discussion of the seal, but learned nothing of value. The second male was very quiet, unusually so if the other's words were any indication, and did not go into any detail other than to say that the seal was intact. Kushu also paid close attention to the confrontation that occurred when the other female barged into the room. It appeared there was discord within the human ranks, and he could potentially use this to his advantage. Which brought him back to his current circumstances. The second female, apparently the vessel's mother, if her words were any indication, had refused to put him down for hours on end. She had sought out the first female and they had talked and wept together for some time, but had discussed nothing of relevance that Kushu could determine. Even the irony of their resolution to not let anyone mistake the vessel for the tailed beast grew stale quickly. It was difficult to laugh at their lack of understanding given his current situation. And now they, along with the vessel, were asleep. He wanted to continue testing the limits of his current situation, but had already determined that any further flares, as they called them, would bring suspicion and mistrust upon him. Given his current helpless state, that was unacceptable. Then he noticed that the body seemed to be demanding sustenance, and increasing the flow or concentration of his yuki to deal with it did nothing to alleviate the problem. After attempting to use the body's limbs to rouse the female currently holding him, he was forced to call out using the body's vocal cords. He, the Kyubi no Yuko, was now a helpless babe crying for his mother's milk. Kushu was not annoyed. He was furious. That his anger stirred his yuki and only made the vessel cry louder did not appease him in the slightest. Same day. 8:55 a.m. Konoha, Hokage's Tower, Council Chambers. The council chambers located in the Hokage Tower were the traditional meeting place for the representatives of Konoha's government, both military and civilian. The room itself was large but sparsely decorated. 3 large tables arranged to form a triangle stood in the middle of the room. One table was reserved for the 10 elected civilian representatives, the second table was reserved for the representatives of the 10 most prominent or powerful ninja clans, and the last table was reserved for the Hokage, the ANBU commander, the Jounin commander, and any guests or representatives they chose to invite to the meeting. A few smaller tables were arranged along the walls, meant to hold food or refreshments for when the meetings ran long. The representatives were currently separated, with the ninja talking quietly to each other on one side of the room and the civilians mingling on the other. The civilian representatives on the council had spent most of the night with their families as they marveled at the fact that they had been spared destruction. A few of their number had ninja relatives, sometimes brothers or sisters, sometimes children, but for the most part their immediate families had come through unscathed. They considered their good fortune both a miracle and a testament to the power of their village. Their ninja counterparts had not fared nearly so well. The ninja appeared calm and stoic, but small gestures of comfort and commiseration could be seen as they heard of the losses each had sustained. Of the 10 shinobi clans which had a seat on the council, only 8 were currently present: the Aburame, Akimichi, Hyuga, Inuzuka, Nara, Senju, Uchiha, and Yamanaka clans. The Kayamizu and Murakami clan seats were empty, and would remain so. Those two clans had been on the decline in recent years and had been reduced to 7 and 5 members respectively. There had already been quiet talk of revoking their seats on the council and opening them up for other clans or representatives to occupy, but that was all moot now. All of the clan members had been active ninja, and all of them had perished in the battle against the tailed beast. While the other clans had survived, they had not done so unscathed. Shigeo Abirame had lost both of his parents and his wife, not to mention several other clan members. The Akimichi were traditionally close combatants and lost 2 members before it was determined their jutsu would be completely ineffective. The Hyuga, Inuzuka, Nara, and Uchiha had lost several members each, including some Inuzuka's husband, Kenichi. The Yamanaka were keeping it quiet for the moment, but several members had attempted to utilize their mind-based jutsu against the Kyubi and had yet to awake. There was some hope they could still recover, but it diminished with each passing hour. The Senju clan, consisting solely of Tsunade Senju, was technically the only clan to come through the conflict without losses. At precisely 9 o'clock, the council doors opened and Hiruzen Sarutobi strode into the chamber, accompanied by the ANBU commander in the traditional dragon mask and the current Jounin commander, Kensuke Sawada. The room fell silent as their attention focused on the third Hokage. In the years since his retirement, Sarutobi had relaxed considerably and allowed a more laid-back, genial personality to shine through. He was still involved in shinobi affairs in an advisory capacity, but generally appeared to be enjoying his retirement to the fullest. It was not uncommon to see him strolling through the village, enjoying the weather or idling in the park, simply observing the people of the village with a smile on his face. That was not the man who walked into the council chambers. This man walked firmly and with a clear sense of purpose, his eyes sharp and his face grim. Despite his nearly 60 years of age, there was no sign of weakness in his posture or gait, and everyone in the room sat a little straighter as they remembered why he was known as the god of shinobi. They remained silent as Sarutobi stopped before the chair reserved for the Hokage. He turned and faced the rest of the council, but pointedly did not sit. Normally Sarutobi would be accompanied by his 2 former teammates and closest advisors, Koharu Yuditane and Hamura Mitokado. Their absence likely meant that they had not survived the battle with the tailed beast. As everyone else took their seats, the Jounin commander cleared his throat and began the meeting. Ladies and gentlemen, you all know why we are here. Our village has suffered a catastrophic loss of life, and we must act swiftly and decisively to both protect the village and replenish our forces. Among our many losses was Namikaze Minato, our 4th Hokage, who gave his life performing a technique that ultimately ended the battle and prevented further loss of life. A moment of silence for our Hokage and our fallen comrades, please. Everyone in the chamber bowed their heads. After 10 seconds, Kensuke continued. Given this loss, our village is currently without a leader. As such, our first order of business is to appoint a new Hokage to lead us through this trying time. I hereby nominate Hiruzen Sarutobi, our previous 3rd Hokage. Tsunade immediately spoke up. Seconded, she said firmly. She was echoed a moment later by the ANBU commander. The rest of the council quickly nodded in agreement, though Fugaku Uchiha hid a frown as he did so. The Jounin commander eyed the room for a moment, then spoke again. Does anyone have reason to object to this nomination? He almost managed to keep the smirk out of his voice as he did so, but several people in the room snorted, all of them amused at the thought of someone objecting to the god of shinobi. Are there any other nominations? Kensuke asked. He eyed the room warily this time. Despite Sarutobi's obvious qualifications and proven ability, there were at least 2 other people in the room who could make a serious argument for their own candidacy for Hokage, Fugaku Uchiha and Tsunade Senju. He personally didn't believe Tsunade would ever want the job despite her lineage and prowess, but Fugaku was another matter entirely. He possessed sufficient skill and more than his share of ambition, though he kept it tightly controlled in most circumstances. Sure enough, Kensuke could see irritation shining through Fugaku's carefully blank facade. While the comparison of Minato Namikaze and any other ninja in Konoha with the possible exception of Sarutobi would always end in Minato's favor, the comparison of a Sarutobi well past his prime and years into retirement against a much younger and actively serving Fugaku Uchiha was not so clear-cut. In terms of experience and skill, Sarutobi would win hands down, but his age worked against him now. Fugaku was 29 years old and was on the cusp of becoming an S-rank shinobi, and if appointed Hokage could conceivably enjoy a term of service nearly as long as Sarutobi's own. Sarutobi was still fit, but in 10 years he would be an old man while Fugaku would be in the prime of his life. Kensuke stiffened slightly as Fugaku slowly stood and cleared his throat. It technically wasn't forbidden to nominate yourself for the position of Hokage, though in practice it had never been done. I think I speak for all of us when I say that I believe this village would be best served by appointing an experienced Hokage. I move that we vote immediately to appoint Sandaime-sama as our Hokage once more so that we can proceed to address the many pressing concerns facing our village. Fugaku spoke calmly and evenly, making eye contact with each person in the room in turn. He was looking directly at Sarutobi when he finished, and held his gaze for a long moment before he sat down again. Kensuke was impressed despite himself. That little speech had probably done more to help Fugaku follow Sarutobi as Hokage than any amount of posturing could have. Everyone in the room knew of Fugaku's ambition, and that he was willing to set it aside for the village spoke well of him, regardless of the motivations behind it. Nodding slightly at Fugaku in respect, Kensuke waited for someone to second the motion, and Tsunade once again lent her voice to the proceedings. The vote was unanimous. Sarutobi nodded sharply. I thank you all for your continued faith in me. The will of fire burns strong in all of you, and with your support we shall come through this stronger than ever, he said, then finally sat down. Our first order of business is to assess the current state of the village in the wake of the tailed beast's attack. Dragon has surveyed the damage to the village and conducted a head count of our ninja forces in preparation for this meeting. Dragon? The ANBU commander stepped forward and bowed. When the ninja spoke, the voice was distorted by the mask and unidentifiable as to age or even gender, but was still quite understandable. Yes, Lord Hokage. The damage to the village itself was minimal, limited to shattered glass and minor damage caused by the beast's roar and incidental damage accrued during the evacuation. No buildings or infrastructure were damaged. The ANBU commander paused to gather his thoughts for a few moments, then continued. The survey of ninja forces reveals that 107 ninja have been confirmed dead, with an additional 231 unaccounted for and presumed dead. Stunned silence filled the chamber. The civilian representatives had been isolated from the battle itself, and while they understood the danger, had no idea the battle had gone so badly. The ninjas on the council knew things had been bad, but even they were shocked that so many had died. The ANBU commander continued. Of the 338 ninja confirmed or presumed dead, 17 were ANBU, 82 Jounin, 161 special Jounin, and the remaining 78 Chunin. In addition, there are 28 ninja 2 ANBU, 7 Jounin, 3 special Jounin, and 16 Chunin who are listed as permanently disabled. Analysis of mission capacity and defensive capability is ongoing, but initial estimates indicate that, including all ninja who were away on missions during the attack, we have 7 ninja cleared for S-rank missions, and less than 30 cleared for solo A-rank missions. If we maintain our current defensive allocation, Konoha will experience nearly a 70% loss in mission income in the next year alone. Projections indicate that Konoha will be bankrupt or overrun within 3 years. Sarutobi's head was bowed as he heard the death toll. 338 ninja dead on his orders, while under his command. Only the death tolls of the second or third ninja wars compared, and those were spread out over years. This had happened in less than 3 hours. The other members of the council slowly digested the news. The civilians looked faintly ill, their previous belief that Konoha had been spared by some miracle feeling hollow now that the consequences were becoming clear. After a full minute of silent contemplation as each member considered the situation, Sarutobi spoke up. Our most pressing concern is the manpower available for missions. We can't decrease our defensive allocation. If anything, we'll need to increase it. The other villages will test us once word gets out about the attack, and if they sense weakness they will not hesitate to take advantage. We also can't allow income from missions to drop so far. I will request support from the Fire Lord, but I suspect we'll be lucky to get enough to cover 5% of our annual income, and that will dry up well before we have recovered. He has always maintained that the village should be self-sufficient, and his generosity will only extend so far. The logistics division will need to provide specifics, but for the purposes of this discussion let us assume that we can allow income to drop to 80% of our current levels at most. In order to shore up our manpower, for the foreseeable future I will be placing the village on a limited war footing. All inactive ninja will be reactivated, including clan heads and clan elders. All leaves and vacations are hereby cancelled, and all reserve ninja will be called into active duty. Dragon, how many additional ninja does that give us? Dragon thought for a moment, then replied, in theory, that would provide us with 3 ANBU, roughly 40 additional Jounin and 90 special Jounin, and over 200 Chunin. However, given how long some of those ninja have been inactive, I would expect the Jounin and special Jounin numbers to be significantly lower, at least in the short term. Sarutobi nodded thoughtfully. I see. I am also increasing the percentage of pay per mission allotted to the village, up to an additional 25%. Again, the logistics division will provide more concrete numbers as our exact situation becomes clear. At the very least this should buy us some time to train or activate additional ninja. The shinobi representatives all winced, but no one voiced an objection. That measure would not be popular, even less popular than pulling some of their clan members out of their retirements. The majority of ninja, especially those without clans, lived off of their mission pay. An additional 25% would seriously impact their finances. In order to alleviate some of the increased demands on our ninja, I am also implementing subsidies for ninja housing and equipment. Any and all ninja will pay reduced prices for goods and services provided by civilians for as long as I deem necessary. The ninja relaxed slightly, nodding to themselves. They would likely still see less money overall, but this measure would help significantly, and would make the situation much more palatable to the average ninja. Some of the civilians, on the other hand, frowned. They knew better than to interrupt at the moment, but they didn't see why it was necessary to cut into their own profits. They already supported the village through taxes and mission fees, and diverting even more of their funds to support the ninja seemed excessive. If the ninja needed more money, they should run more missions. The ninja certainly weren't falling over themselves to spend more money at their stores when business was slow, now were they? Sarutobi continued, filing away the reaction of the civilians for a later time. I want all of you to come up with additional ideas for either reducing spending or increasing income, preferably without levying additional taxes on the ninja population. Keep in mind that all ninja cleared for high-ranked missions will likely be unavailable for some time. We will reconvene tomorrow morning for further discussion. However, before we break, there is one other matter that needs to be addressed. It relates to how the fourth Hokage was able to defeat the tailed beast. The ninja on the council nodded knowingly, though a look of anger briefly crossed Tsunade's face. Several people noted it, though no one knew what it was about. The civilians on the other hand appeared to be confused. One, Naoki Taniguchi spoke up, the first civilian member of the council to do so since the meeting began. Hokage-sama, what do you mean? Didn't the fourth Hokage kill the beast? Sarutobi shook his head. Actually, no, he didn't. No ninja has ever been able to kill a tailed beast, not even the weakest of them, the one-tailed. The fourth Hokage instead sealed the beast into a vessel. What is important is the means he used to do so. Minato, along with Jiraiya, was researching an obscure seal known as the all-consuming seal of the god of death. They both agreed that it was the most powerful seal currently in existence, and thus he chose it to seal the nine-tailed beast. He did so knowing that the price for using the seal would be his life. As I understand it, Minato initially planned to use the death god to kill the beast, or at the very least separate it from its power. Gamabunta, Minato's summon, was present during the sealing and told Jiraiya what happened inside the seal, and Jiraiya has since related those events to me. In short, the death god was unable to kill the tailed beast. Instead, the death god informed Minato that the beast would be sealed into a vessel and then banished for a period of 100 years once the vessel failed. The room relaxed, letting out a tension that had unknowingly been building since Sarutobi began relating the events of the sealing. 100 years before the beast could possibly return to attack the village. The ninja, who were exposed to seals on a regular basis and had heard of the fate of the other tailed beasts, were already adding years, possibly decades, to that total as they considered the potential lifespan of the child selected to be the vessel. The civilians, who rarely encountered seals or concerned themselves with the details of ninja life, reached a rather different conclusion. Naoki spoke again, curiosity evident on his face. What is the vessel, Hokage-sama? Not what? Who? What? The fourth Hokage turned the beast into a person? Naoki shouted. Sarutobi startled, surprised at Naoki's conclusion. No, he didn't turn the beast into a person, he sealed the beast into a baby. The child is the beast's prison, essentially. It requires a human being to contain a tailed beast, and the younger the child the more secure the seal, Sarutobi replied, attempting to keep the explanation as simple as possible, mindful of the civilians' limited understanding of seals. Naoki slowly calmed down, then shook his head. I see, I suppose. That's rather unfortunate. At any rate, I assume the beast, or child, or whatever, has already been taken care of? Tsunade jumped to her feet. What is that supposed to mean? She yelled out, her fists clenched. Yoshikazu Nara frowned, beginning to piece together a disturbing picture as he recalled certain other facts relating to Tsunade, Minato and Kushina. Several other ninja were muttering to one another, wondering both about Tsunade's outburst and Naoki's odd question. Naoki shrank back, startled by her outburst. The Hokage just said that the beast would be banished for 100 years once the vessel failed. Since the vessel is a human being, I would assume that failure means death. It's a shame, but... Tsunade's face turned a particularly violent shade of red and she became an indistinguishable blur as she leapt across the room, fully intending to punch Naoki through the floor and not particularly caring if he survived the experience. Only Dragon's swift reaction saved Naoki's life as the ANBU commander tackled him out of the way. Tsunade's fist passed through empty air before it met the floor and completely shattered it, peppering the other nearby counselors with shrapnel. The room descended into chaos. The civilians were scrambling out of the way, shouting in fear or outrage, while the ninja moved to restrain Tsunade. Yoshikazu's shadow connected with Tsunade's and froze her in place, while the Akimichi councilman grabbed her arms and the Hyuga councilman had his Byakugan activated and was poised to disable her at a moment's notice. Naoki himself appeared to be stunned, even as Dragon lifted him to his feet. It took him several seconds to gather himself, but his voice finally cut through the din. "What? Why did you just try to kill me?" he exclaimed. Tsunade snarled at him, her face still flushed red with anger, but made no reply. Naoki sputtered for a moment, and was about to continue when Sarutobi interrupted him. "Councilman Taniguchi," Sarutobi said, his voice cold and harder than steel. "You have just implied that I, either personally or through an intermediary, have taken part in the premeditated murder of a newborn infant. Explain yourself." Naoki paled dramatically, sensing Sarutobi's displeasure. Nonetheless, he calmed himself and straightened his jacket before addressing the room. "My apologies, Hokage-sama, I must have misspoken. I merely meant that, given the situation, it seemed prudent to eliminate the risk of the tailed beast's return as quickly and thoroughly as possible. I do not claim to understand the fourth Hokage's plans or actions, but you yourself stated that the sealing did not proceed as intended. Given that, we cannot know for certain the state of the seal or how effective it will be. Further, you quoted the god of death himself as stating that once the seal failed, the tailed beast would be banished from the human realm for 100 years. As such, if we deliberately cause the failure of the seal, then we can guarantee 100 years of safety from this threat. I had originally assumed that the vessel spoken of was an object of some sort. It is tragic that a human being was sacrificed in this manner, but I would hope that whoever the child's parents are, they are secure in the knowledge that their sacrifice has ensured the safety of the village for many years to come." The whole room listened in stunned silence as Naoki laid out his reasoning. The ninja were forced to admit that his argument was logical, if somewhat off base. Tsunade had resumed her efforts to attack the counselor partway through his explanation, but was firmly held in place by the combined efforts of the ninja around her. Naoki sensed that the ninja on the council did not agree with his perfectly reasonable explanation, and desperately sought to divert attention away from the topic at hand, if only slightly. A bit of flattery wouldn't hurt either, he thought. He spoke again as an idea occurred to him. In fact, Hokage-sama, you haven't mentioned the identity of the child or its parents. They should be recognized throughout the village as heroes for their sacrifice. Who is the vessel?" Sarutobi had originally intended to rebuke the councilman for his insinuations and correct his flawed logic, but found himself at a loss. Technically, everything he had said was true. The sealing did not go as intended, the beast would be banished if the child died, and though he hated the very thought, killing the child would ensure 100 years of peace. As Naoki, and apparently most of the civilians, believed the seal to be faulty in some fashion, they would not accept that every day the child lived was another day added to that 100-year total. Even as his mind cast about for a way to explain the situation that would remove thoughts of murder from their minds, he heard Naoki's next question. Several scenarios where word of Naruto's identity spread throughout the village and would-be heroes sought to slay the beast occurred to him, and he responded swiftly to eliminate that threat. "No, I have not told you his identity, nor will I. From this moment forward the identity of the vessel of the tailed beast is an S-rank secret, and will be protected as such. If you betray this secret to anyone who does not already know it, you will be executed immediately," Sarutobi declared. He would be damned if he allowed any harm to come to Minato's child, especially from overzealous fools. Further, Councilman Taniguchi, you are correct when you state that you do not understand the fourth Hokage's plans or actions, and should keep that in mind before you attempt to interfere with ninja affairs in the future. This matter is closed to discussion, and will not be brought up in the future. Am I understood? Naoki gaped in shock as the Hokage summarily dismissed his concerns. He nodded slowly, knowing that any other response would likely only make his situation worse. That goes for everyone else as well, Sarutobi continued, sending a sharp glare around the room. The other ninja nodded sharply, most understanding his reasoning and recognizing that the identity of a tailed beast vessel was often considered an S-rank secret anyway. Tsunade finally appeared to be coming down after Sarutobi had dealt with the situation to her satisfaction, though she occasionally sent a nasty glare in Naoki's direction. Good. We will reconvene tomorrow morning, and I expect to hear some useful ideas on how to strengthen our village. Dismissed, Sarutobi said, and quickly exited the room. The other ninja followed on his heels, most already creating lists of which ninja in their clans could be reactivated, and which would need to be trained until they were once again fit for duty. Tsunade spared one last glare for Naoki before she stalked out of the room, muttering incoherently under her breath. Fugaku Uchiha was the last ninja to exit the room, a speculative look in his eyes as he reviewed the events of the meeting. Naoki continued to gape as the ninja filed out of the room. That's it. She tried to kill me. You aren't going to do anything about that? He asked, half to himself. Apparently not, if the empty seats in the room were any indication. He shared a disbelieving look with some of his fellow counselors who had remained in the room, all of them wondering just how much had changed in the last 24 hours. April 18, 338 NE. 3:00 p.m. Konoha General Library. In the 3 years since the attack, Konoha had slowly but surely recovered. The ninja worked nearly to the breaking point and passed, for a few, and had to give up some of the luxuries they enjoyed during the earlier times of peace, but were nonetheless able to keep Konoha operational. With the latest batch of graduates from the academy and the upcoming reviews to determine if any genin were eligible to advance to Chunin, there was even talk that the situation would return to manageable levels, which meant fewer missions overall for each ninja. For most of the veteran ninja, it would be a welcome reprieve. Kushu was only vaguely aware of the overall situation of Konoha, though he kept an ear out for any information he could potentially use. His first year, after the odd happenings of his first week, had been spent in ANBU HQ. That had allowed him access to a wealth of information that he had come to take for granted. He was not only able to observe some of the most powerful humans in the village as they trained or studied, but also overheard up-to-date information regarding all aspects of village affairs. It had helped fill in his understanding of how the village operated considerably. That had ended after a year. He had instead been sent to an orphanage to live among children his age, and had thus lost access to what he viewed as vital resources. His protests were dismissed as tantrums and trouble adjusting, which only served to fuel his anger further. He had continued his protests for nearly a week before he determined that they would not return him to ANBU HQ under any circumstances. As was becoming all too common, he swallowed his pride and forced himself to adapt. He resolved to form connections among the humans his age, connections that would hopefully prove useful in the future. He found that thinking of his efforts as similar to managing tribal affairs back in Makai helped, if only slightly. He had already determined long ago that demons and humans thought in very different ways, and he still found the actions of humans generally incomprehensible. Nonetheless, he persevered and attempted to form bonds with his fellow orphans. What a tremendous waste of time that proved to be. His initial efforts lead him to the singular, inescapable conclusion that children, while idiotic, were far more observant than adult humans. Despite his study of their behavior and his attempts to mimic their actions and speech patterns, efforts which were apparently more than sufficient to satisfy the adults in the orphanage, he had failed miserably at his attempts to blend in where the children were concerned. After spending more than a few hours in his presence, the children tended to avoid him thereafter, describing him as weird or even creepy. They were never able to explain why they felt this way to the adults when pressed, so the caretakers just responded with general blandishments to play nice and get along. After a few months, the pattern seemed to be set. The children would make token efforts to interact with him when urged by the adults, but would never willingly initiate contact otherwise. The pattern continued to this day. Despite his failure to form connections, the overall situation had improved considerably as far as Kushu was concerned. Ironically, his isolation had proven to be a boon in this regard, as he was able to sneak away without drawing attention and spend his time observing the rest of the village. He initially focused his efforts on studying the interactions of adult humans in an effort to prepare for the future, but changed his path considerably when he discovered that the humans kept a repository of all their knowledge, and that it was open to the public. It took him a few hours to construct a scenario that would allow him unfettered access to this library without attracting undue attention, but once again his isolation proved a boon. After pestering anyone who would listen to teach him to read because he was bored since no one would play with him, he was introduced to the written word far earlier than was the norm for children. When he picked up the requisite skill at a voracious rate, the adults began to chatter excitedly about a genius intellect and actually went out of their way to encourage him. Seeing an opportunity, Kushu willingly played along, taking whatever tests and answering whatever questions they wanted him to, as long as he got more books. He was careful not to present himself as knowledgeable, however, just intelligent. The latter was beneficial, the former could prove disastrous. He miraculously grasped most concepts after only seeing them once, but he made sure he didn't know if he couldn't explain where he had acquired such knowledge. As he was given access to more advanced books and scrolls, however, he soon had a ready excuse to allay any suspicions. The last few months Kushu had spent the majority of his time holed up in the library, gradually increasing the difficulty of the subjects he studied. He had already begun studying subjects generally taught to children twice his age, and hoped to move even higher soon. Once he had established that he could comprehend the text as well as any adult, he could then read any and all books without raising suspicion, and he could begin researching far more useful areas, such as human psychology and chakra theory. Even the dictionary they had given him early on had proven far more useful than he had imagined, providing some useful insight into how humans viewed the world. Kushu smiled to himself as he opened up his next book, Legends of the Tailed Beast. Yes, His current situation was irritating, but it was not without its benefits. 5:30 p.m. Outside Konoha General Library. You sure about this? I mean, it's just a kid. 4, maybe 5 years old? What's so dangerous about him? Masato asked quietly. He was a plain-looking man, close-cropped black hair, average height, slightly overweight, sturdy clothing of common material. Most people wouldn't look twice at him, which was just the way he liked it. He was currently leaning against the side of a building across the street from the library, idly watching the people walking by as he conversed with his companion. Yes, I'm sure. Our source was very specific. The kid himself technically isn't a threat, but I can't tell you what is. There's a law about it, after all. His companion wore similar clothing, though he looked uncomfortable in them, as if he wasn't used to wearing them. He wore a large hat that provided considerable shade and just happened to also obscure most of his face. There's laws about murder, too. Particularly murder in kids. Decent folk take that sort of thing real personal. Masato said dubiously, eyeing the other man. As if you care. You've already got your money, now just do the job. The man snapped, then turned and stalked off. Masato smirked as the man left, then returned his gaze to the library across the way. The old bastard had a self-righteous attitude that rubbed him the wrong way, and Masato just loved to mock people like that. They treated him as if he was some sort of scum, when they were the ones hiring him to kill kids. Hypocrites. It was true though, as long as he got paid, he didn't much care what he did. His friend had been kind enough to pay in advance, and paid well to boot. Despite all the doom and gloom talk about mysterious threats and civic duty, Masato would bet his considerable pay that this kid was some illegitimate bastard a rich merchant or nobleman found inconvenient. Wouldn't be the first time he'd been hired to clean up that kind of mess, and likely wouldn't be the last. Another 5 minutes of waiting and his target walked out of the building, loaded down with books. A touch strange to see a kid read in that much, but it gave him the perfect opening to approach the target without raising his guard. Hey kid, you need some help with those books? Masato called out, a friendly smile on his face. 11:00 p.m. Hokage's office. Ibiki Marino and Inoichi Yamanaka stood at attention before the Hokage's desk, postures stiff and hands clasped behind their backs. They kept their expressions carefully controlled and professional, but beads of sweat were running down their faces despite the cool temperature of the room. Their eyes were glued to the man sitting at the desk, watching warily. Beside them stood the ANBU commander, dragon mask firmly in place. The object of their concern, Hiruzen Sarutobi, currently had his hands clasped before his face and his head bowed. His whole body would occasionally tremble and shake. They did not mistake this as a sign of weakness or illness, however. No, the killing intent permeating the room made it clear that the Hokage was very, very angry right now. They just hoped he didn't decide to lash out at them. Sarutobi's fist suddenly slammed onto his desk. A loud crack echoed throughout the room as part of the desk shattered from the force of his blow. Damn it! He roared. Dragon, how the hell did this happen? Dragon bowed sharply. I have no excuse, Hokage-sama. Hawk and Cat evaluated the man as he approached and determined that he was unarmed and possessed a civilian level of chakra reserves, and thus presented no threat. Given his current state, we have been unable to determine where he was carrying the knife or how it was concealed. Given his tactics and the speed of his attack, we can only assume that he was a professional assassin. We have been unable to determine if he was trained as a ninja, though given his reserves it seems unlikely. Sarutobi growled under his breath, but reined in his initial impulse to lash out at the ANBU commander. Questioning the skills of his ANBU would get him nowhere, and would most certainly do more harm than good. That didn't mean he would let this pass without some form of punishment, however. Hawk and Cat are to undergo remedial training for the next 2 weeks. I want them to report to Guy for an intense martial arts regimen. Am I understood? Dragon winced. Guy Mato had already established himself as a taijutsu genius, and was considered the strongest ninja in all of Konoha as far as hand-to-hand combat was concerned. The absolutely brutal training methods he employed were even more legendary, and Guy considered such methods normal. Dragon couldn't even imagine what would qualify as intense for Guy. Hawk and Cat would have a very, very painful 2 weeks ahead of them. Yes, Hokage-sama, Dragon said stiffly. Sarutobi paused, then broached the subject that worried him the most. What have you determined about Naruto's reaction? Dragon took a long moment to respond. Based on the reports from Hawk and Cat, once the assailant stabbed Naruto, he immediately began to walk away. They believe he was attempting to leave the area entirely before anyone noticed what had happened. However, before he made it 2 steps, the tailed beast chakra exploded from Naruto's body and formed what they described as large, animal-like claws. These chakra claws grabbed the assailant and pulled him back towards Naruto. They state that the man began screaming in pain the moment the claws made contact, and our analysis of his remains indicates that large portions of his body were burned or dissolved. Our medics concluded that the tailed beast's chakra displayed properties similar to fire or acid. Without further experiments, we are unable to determine whether this will always be the case for anyone other than Naruto, or whether the chakra changes depending on the situation. We can state for certain that Naruto suffered no ill effects from the usage of the tailed beast's chakra. Sarutobi relaxed slightly, and motioned for Dragon to continue. Once the claws had a firm hold on the assailant, they proceeded to crush and tear his body apart, which killed him more or less instantly. Once the assailant was dealt with, the tailed beast's chakra withdrew and Naruto collapsed. Hawk secured the scene and called for a mezzanine while Kat began applying emergency care. Sarutobi pondered for a few moments, then asked, "Do you think Naruto-kun had control of the beast's chakra?" "I do not believe he was fully conscious of his actions, Hokage-sama, but I do believe it was under his control, yes. The chakra did not exhibit the same malevolence as during the attack, which I attribute to the absence of the beast's consciousness. I believe the beast's chakra was drawn out as part of an instinctual response due to the severity of the attack. If the beast was in control, the 3 civilian bystanders would likely have been targeted next. Instead, the chakra immediately withdrew once the threat had passed." "What happened to the civilians?" "They have been detained for questioning. Officially as witnesses at this time, they are still being held in ANBU HQ. I hereby request permission to alter or remove this event from their minds to prevent the spread of Naruto's identity among the civilian populace once their interrogation has been completed." "Granted," Sarutobi said immediately. He then turned his attention to Ibiki. "What have you been able to find out?" "As we are unable to question the assailant directly, we have canvassed the area for anyone who saw him prior to his attack on Naruto. Based on the description we provided, one of the librarians mentioned that she saw him talking to someone in a large hat that obscured his face shortly before the attack took place. With only that vague description to go on, our attempts to locate this possible accomplice have so far turned up empty. An Inuzuka squad is attempting to find a scent trail, but that area is heavily trafficked and they have had no luck so far. We have also attempted to compile a list of all known persons aware of Naruto's status and identity. Given the events immediately following the tailed beast's attack, the entire ninja force is aware in general terms that a vessel exists, and that the vessel was born on or shortly before October 10th of that year, but no more than that. Narrowing the list to those who know of Naruto's identity specifically still leaves us with over 300 ninja. The ANBU commander and Jounin commander, as well as every clan head are, of course, aware. I presume Jiraiya-sama is aware as well. As Naruto's primary physician, Shizen-sama and her staff are also aware. In addition, due to their ability to detect the presence of the tailed beast, it was determined a necessary risk to inform all members of the Aburame, Hyuga, and Uchiha clans. Due to the interaction between the tailed beast and their clan jutsu, all Yamanaka clan members have been informed as well. Further, due to Naruto's time in ANBU HQ and the frequency that ANBU is tasked with duties relating to Naruto, all members of ANBU past and present are aware of his status. There are sufficient mezzanine qualified to care for Naruto that belong to one or more of the preceding groups that it has not been necessary to inform any other medical staff of his status, which fortunately includes the events of this evening. With the exception of those currently away on missions, all ninja on that list are currently accounted for, and are considered to be in good standing with the village. That said, Shizen-sama was under investigation for a year after her teacher left the village. As I am not privy to the details of that situation, I am unable to draw conclusions as to their potential culpability in this matter, Ibiki concluded. Given the nature of the leak, Shizen-chan and her teacher are not a risk, Sarutobi said dismissively. He knew of another name to add to that list, but was not about to bring it up given the present company. I note that no civilians are included, Sarutobi said slowly. And yet someone hired an assassin to kill him. Am I to believe that one of my own ninja did this? No, Hokage-sama, Ibiki said quickly, paling. However, given the numbers involved, it is impossible to determine which, if any, leaked this information. There is always the possibility the information was accidentally released without the person's knowledge as well. At this time, the investigation has no further leads. Sarutobi nodded, his face carefully neutral. Inside, however, he was seething. Someone had attempted to murder Minato's son, the boy he'd come to think of as his own grandchild, and while the one who had perpetrated the attack was dead, it seemed that the person or people who hired him would be getting away with it. He turned at last to Inoichi. How is Naruto-kun doing? Inoichi frowned, uncertain how to start. At Sarutobi's impatient look, however, he quickly settled on relating the hospital report first. Naruto-kun woke and was able to speak coherently a mere 2 hours after the incident, shortly after the surgery was concluded. He had no issues answering the questions I asked in the time I was allowed to visit him. In addition, Shizen-sama performed the most recent examination 30 minutes ago and was unable to find any evidence of injury. At all. The other ninja in the room stirred at this. Sarutobi's brow crinkled in confusion. Hawk and Cat reported that the blade was buried in Naruto's side, he said, glancing at Dragon, who nodded in agreement. Inoichi shook his head. From what I personally observed, given the state of his clothing and the amount of blood, well, maybe not the blood. He interrupted himself with a small shudder. He decided to restart his explanation. His shirt had a cut located roughly between the fourth and fifth rib, consistent with a blow aimed at the heart. In addition, the Mednin who first operated on Naruto said that he removed a blade roughly 6 inches long from Naruto's side at the beginning of surgery, more than long enough to reach his heart. I understand that ANBU is currently examining the blade for potential evidence. At Inoichi's prompt, Dragon nodded again. Inoichi continued, however, as I said, the latest examination showed no evidence of any injury whatsoever. Shizen-sama concluded that the injury had completely healed without scarring in 5 hours, perhaps even less. Ibiki let out a low whistle. Impressive. Is that the beast's work, or did one of his parents have a bloodline? He asked, glancing the Hokage curiously. While Ibiki was one of the ninja fully aware of Naruto's status, his lineage was another matter altogether. To his knowledge, only the Hokage and those the Hokage personally informed were aware of the identity of Naruto's parents, though there were plenty of theories. Sarutobi sighed. It's almost certainly a side effect of the beast's presence within the seal. When he was first examined following the sealing, the Mednin stated that the beast's chakra was spread throughout his body and was most likely helping him in some fashion. I would call rapid healing help, wouldn't you? The other ninja in the room shifted uncomfortably. It was rather telling that Sarutobi still found himself unable to speak Tsunade's name, even though it was obvious she was the only one Sarutobi would trust to examine Naruto under those circumstances. Back then, anyway. Inoichi cleared his throat uncomfortably. There do appear to have been some minor complications following his usage of the beast's chakra yesterday. Faint markings have appeared on either side of his face, 3 lines on each side. You have to be fairly close to notice them, but they are definitely part of his skin. Shizen-sama believes they may be a consequence of the increased amount of the beast's chakra flowing throughout his system. She estimates that the chakra currently circulating through his system is roughly 3 times what it was when he first moved to the orphanage. This is in addition to his own chakra reserves, which are very large for a child his age, more along the lines of what one would expect from an elite genin. Other than the marks on his cheeks, Naruto is fine physically and will make, or rather, seems to have already made a full recovery. However, I have some serious concerns about his mental state. Sarutobi turned to focus solely on Inoichi, much to Inoichi's discomfort. Explain. While I am unable to use the mind transfer technique to perform a more thorough examination, I am trained as a psychologist and asked him the standard battery of post-traumatic questions to evaluate his mental state. What I found was disturbing. Naruto has full recall of the events in question but has little to no emotional attachment to them. He seems to understand that someone tried to kill him, but feels nothing more than minor irritation regarding the attempt. He is similarly dismissive of his own actions, simply stating that he removed the threat. In all seriousness, he was more upset that his books had been damaged than that someone attempted to kill him, or that he had ripped that person apart in response. Given that, I must disagree with Dragon-san's assessment of his reaction, at least partially. While the beast's chakra may have been used on instinct, Naruto had every intent of killing his attacker swiftly and decisively. I am generally familiar with Naruto's development up to now, and would agree that he is incredibly intelligent and mature for his age, though still occasionally given to fits of pique. I noted that these fits only happen when he is pulled from his studies. His previous observers have stated that he is too intelligent to connect properly with his peers and that he seeks validation and acceptance through learning and scholastic accomplishment. Prior to today, I would have agreed with their assessment. Sarutobi felt a knot of worry and fear form in his stomach. He knew he wouldn't like what Inoichi was about to say. However, after my talk with him earlier, I was reminded of several other cases I had worked on, and not in a good way. I reviewed his records again, going all the way back to his time in ANBU HQ, and his behavior was generally consistent with my theory. Inoichi paused, and inhaled slowly. He resumed speaking, his voice carefully calm and even. Naruto is constantly seeking to improve himself, and has developed a personality quirk which he uses to conceal his observations of the world around him. He is also incredibly pragmatic, absurdly so for a child, and considers harm to himself to be inconsequential compared to his objectives. He also actively avoids forming emotional attachments to people who aren't like himself. Sarutobi's face paled dramatically as Inoichi continued speaking, and Ibiki looked faintly sick. It was impossible to tell Dragon's expression underneath the mask, but the rigid posture of the ANBU commander's body spoke of considerable tension. I think the presence of the beast's chakra in his system forced his mental development to begin much earlier than is normal for children, and Shizen-sama agreed that this was indeed possible, at least in theory. I think Naruto was aware and cognizant as early as 6 months old and remembers his time in ANBU HQ. Further, I think that Naruto has modeled his personality after the people he observed in his earliest memories. Inoichi paused, letting his words sink in. After a long moment where no one else spoke, he resumed in a quiet voice. Naruto has only acted out excessively on one occasion, shortly after he was moved to the orphanage. This period lasted for nearly a week. At the time, everyone thought he was simply having trouble adjusting to his new situation, but now I'm not so sure. If I'm right and Naruto remembers that far back, he probably believes that he was kicked out of ANBU, and has been trying to get back in ever since. Sarutobi's mind turned back to some of his previous interactions with Naruto, the words they exchanged then taking on a very different meaning in the light of Inochi's theory. "I'll make you proud of me, Hokage-sama," Naruto said, his face scrunched into an expression that was simultaneously serious and adorable. Sarutobi smiled indulgently, and leaned down to pat his head. "You don't have to call me that, you know. I wouldn't mind if you called me Aji-san." Naruto frowned, his face confused now but still every bit as adorable. "That wouldn't be proper, would it, Hokage-sama?" Another memory, this one from a few months ago, when he had heard about Naruto's incredible test scores. "That is very impressive, Naruto-kun. If you keep this up, I might have to make some special arrangements for you," Sarutobi said, intending to encourage the boy, to show him that he was proud and happy for him. Naruto's eyes burned with a strange intensity as he said happily, "Thank you, Hokage-san." If Inoichi was right, Naruto hadn't seen those occasions as visits from a grandfatherly figure, as Sarutobi had intended. Naruto had seen them as evaluations, ones that he intended to pass at any cost. Sarutobi fell back against his chair heavily, his eyes distant as he called up other memories, all of them twisting into a horrible mockery of the relationship he had tried to build with Naruto. "Kami, how could this have happened?" he asked. No one in the room answered him. After a few minutes of silent contemplation, Sarutobi finally turned his focus back to Inoichi. "What can we do to fix it?" he asked. Inoichi shifted uncomfortably. "At this point, I'm not sure it can be fixed, in the sense that you mean. Naruto will likely always exhibit certain traits reminiscent of ANBU. That said, there is still time to show Naruto that he doesn't have to dedicate his entire life to rejoining ANBU. With therapy, I believe he could learn to value his own life appropriately as well as form meaningful connections with his peers. However, I also believe that in this case his peers would be children of ninja clans, rather than civilians. Given his inclinations and future career, it is unlikely that he will respect civilian children enough to consider them worth his time, much less friends. Overcoming that particular hurdle will take considerably more time, I feel." Sarutobi nodded slowly, his mind whirling with plans and possibilities. This situation was his fault, at least in part. If she had stayed and continued to oversee Naruto's development, they might have caught this problem much earlier. Shizen was skilled, but she lacked her experience, and in his paranoia he had refused to allow Shizen to so much as see Naruto for over a year. He cursed himself for that decision now. A traitorous little voice in the back of his mind whispered that there was someone else who should have been watching over Naruto as he grew up. He squashed it reflexively, as he had many times before. A few minutes passed, each of the ninja pondering their own ideas while they waited for the Hokage to either request their input or reach his own decision. Inoichi gulped as the Hokage turned to him, a small smirk on his face. "Naruto-kun needs therapy, you say?" "Yes, Hokage-sama," he replied nervously. Sarutobi nodded to himself, the smirk growing ever so slightly. "And you believe he would have more success forming relationships with ninja children, rather than civilians?" "Yes, Hokage-sama." The smirk threatened to become a full-blown grin, now, and Inoichi felt his throat drying up. "You have a daughter about his age, don't you?" "Yes, Hoka. Wait, what?" April 19th. -8:00 a.m. ANBU HQ Hospital Wing. Kushu was still lying on the hospital bed when he heard and felt Shizen enter the room. Rather than let her know he had detected her presence, he continued to feign sleep. "Rise and shine, Naruto-kun," she called out in a cheerful voice as she threw open the curtains. Kushu played his role to perfection as he grumbled incoherently and rolled over, pulling the covers over his head. Now, none of that. It's time to eat breakfast, then I need to give you another checkup." If everything looks good, you'll be able to go home after that, Shizen continued, her stern voice tinged with amusement. She was glad to see him act more like a normal child. His usual demeanor could be a little worrisome at times. Kushu grumbled some more, but slowly sat up and stretched. He watched Shizen from the corner of his eye as she smiled at him. He was very familiar with her, of course, as she had become his primary medanine around the same time as he was moved to the orphanage. She also insisted that he call her Shizen-chan, though he took great pleasure in annoying her by forgetting to do so every time they met. Speaking of. Good morning, Shizen-sama, he said lazily. Shizen huffed and stomped her foot. How many times do I have to tell you to call me Nei-chan? Honestly, for someone so smart you're awfully forgetful. Sorry, Shizen-sa Nei-chan. It's just that everyone else calls you that, so Kushu explained. And I keep telling you that you aren't everyone else. You don't remember it, but I was there when you were born, you know. Inside Naruto's body, Kushu rolled his eyes. He had long ago lost count of how many times she told him that. Externally, he smiled and scratched his cheek, looking faintly embarrassed. As they settled down and began eating breakfast, with Shizen once again insisting on joining him as he ate, Kushu decided to use this chance to finally broach a subject he had been leading up to for some time. Hey, Shizen-chan, how does someone become a medanine? Kushu asked, his eyes sparkling with curiosity. He still wasn't well versed in reading humans, so he missed the flash of glee in her eyes as he asked his question. Does someone want to be just like their big sister? Well, it takes a very long time and is very hard, but you might just be smart enough to pull it off, she said teasingly. She was a little more serious as she continued. But first and foremost, you have to become a genin. No one is allowed to study medanine techniques before they are an active shinobi of the village, after all. Kushu rolled his eyes internally again. The human habit of teasing children was incredibly annoying. At least he was able to tease them back, often without the other people knowing. That doesn't mean you can't get an early start in your own studies though. I might have a few books you could look up that would get you on the right track, if you are really interested, Shizen offered. Kushu smiled widely, using the expression to which the adults seemed to respond so positively. Sure enough, a smile was soon growing on Shizen's face as well. Really? That would be great. Thanks, Shizen-chan. It really would be great, Kushu mused. Without the medanine guiding his efforts to fix the damage done to Naruto's body, it would have taken him much longer to heal himself. He was intimately familiar with how Naruto's body was supposed to function, and was learning about how it grew and changed as time passed, but correcting damage on that scale was far more difficult. If he was able to acquire training, he could fix any further damage much more quickly, and perhaps even begin to optimize or alter the body to better suit his needs. Currently the body could only take so much of his yuki before it began to break down under the stress, though he was gradually increasing the amount the body could handle. Manifesting his yuki externally, as he had done when he killed the idiot human earlier, was much less stressful overall, and was limited more by the seal than the body. Unfortunately, it was also a dead giveaway, and could potentially attract the wrong sorts of attention. His use of yuki yesterday had been a calculated risk. Based on his observation of the human's response, it was likely that further use of external yuki outside of life or death situations would not be looked on favorably. Thus, his need to find alternate means of utilizing his power, at least in the short term. Despite his success in increasing the overall amount of yuki outside the seal, he estimated that any Jounin ninja was still a serious threat to him, and perhaps even Chunin level ninja. An ANBU level ninja probably wouldn't even break a sweat, unless he managed to close the distance. He needed more time. Shizen frowned. Naruto had withdrawn again, his face going blank as he focused on his own thoughts. She hated when he did this. No child should look like that. She cursed the Hokage for keeping her away from Naruto for so long. She should be raising him, not some orphanage, and certainly not ANBU. Of course, ideally his mother would be raising him, but that was no longer an option. Naruto-kun, she said, gently laying her hand on his shoulder. His eyes snapped to her hand, and his body stiffened slightly before relaxing. She hated that reaction too, but she ignored it for now. Finish your breakfast so we can get to your examination. I'm sure you are eager to get back to the orphanage. She left it unsaid that he was likely more eager to return to studying his books than to reunite with any friends. As far as she knew, he didn't have any. They were interrupted by a knock at the door, which soon opened to reveal the Hokage and Inoichi Yamanaka. Inoichi seemed nervous for some reason, but the Hokage had a slightly smug look about him, as if he had just won some victory. Shizen hated that look in her experience and never boded well for her. Greetings, Hokage-sama, Yamanaka-san, Shizen said, her tone polite but reserved. Hey, Hokage-ji-san, Yamanaka-san, Naruto said, waving. Inoichi's eyes widened slightly at Naruto's casual greeting to the Hokage, but his nervous look returned quickly. "Hello, Shizen-chan, Naruto-kun. How are you feeling this morning?" the Hokage asked, moving to stand next to Naruto's bed. Naruto smiled and moved his arms around energetically, as if trying to physically demonstrate his good health. "I'm feeling great. Shizen-chan did a great job healing me up. I'm ready to get back to studying, and she says I can go back to the orphanage today." The Hokage winced as Naruto finished speaking, and shared a significant look with Inoichi. Shizen was confused. She hadn't heard or seen anything unusual in Naruto's response, so what did those two pick up on that she missed? "Actually, Naruto-kun, we're here to talk to you about that. We've been thinking that it might be better if you didn't return to the orphanage after all." Kushu stifled his budding excitement. It was unlikely they would send him back to ANBU HQ and the wealth of information contained there, but anywhere was likely to prove more useful than the orphanage. Perhaps the attack had swayed the Hokage to deliver on his promise of special arrangements early. He kept that out of his voice though, opting for moderate interest. "Oh? Where would I be going then?" he asked. Sarutobi nodded to himself, noting that Naruto had made no objection at the idea of leaving the orphanage. He had spent nearly an hour conferring with Inoichi about how best to word the offer and reasoning, and they had expected this response. "I think you would be better off living with a ninja family, with children who are more likely to share your interests. Yamanaka-san has a daughter around your age, and close ties to several other families with children your age as well. He has volunteered to take you in. Would you like that?" Shizen reeled in shock. It felt like someone had just punched her in the gut, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. After her years of looking after Naruto, after dozens of repeated pleas and arguments that Naruto should be placed in her care, the Hokage just gave him away. To Inoichi Yamanaka, of all people. The man had never even spoken to Naruto before yesterday. She was torn between screaming in frustration, breaking down on the spot, and lashing out at the Hokage in anger. It was a close thing, but she managed to pull herself together before she did something she would regret. Sarutobi watched as Naruto blinked, clearly surprised at the offer, then turned to look at Inoichi. "Yamanaka-san? Why would you want me to live with you?" Inoichi faltered slightly. Despite the Hokage's reasoning and very persuasive arguments, he still wasn't fully sold on this idea. He had nothing against Naruto, but his one daughter already ran him ragged, and he wasn't sure he could handle Naruto full-time on top of that. Still, he had talked it over with his wife and they had agreed, and now it was time to follow through. "Well, Naruto-kun, I know that you have had trouble making friends at the orphanage, but like Hokage-sama said, I think you will find it a lot easier to get along with children from ninja families. There would be friends you could relate to, friends who shared your interests, maybe even friends you could learn from." From the gleam in Naruto's eye he knew he was interested. Time to go in for the kill. And not to brag, but Yamanakas tend to be very smart as well, and we have a large private library that I'm sure you would enjoy. Both Inoichi and Sarutobi had expected that to be the clincher, and were thus very surprised when Naruto still hesitated. Naruto turned to Shizen and asked, "Shizen-chan, what do you think? Would living with Yamanaka-san help me become a mednin?" "A mednin? Where in Kami's name did that come from?" Shizen was overjoyed that Naruto would turn to her for advice on something this important. It proved that her efforts to form a relationship with him had not been fruitless after all. Still, she tried to look at it objectively and give his question serious consideration. It was obvious at this point that the Hokage would never allow her to become Naruto's guardian, even if she was allowed to look after him medically. It was also doubtful that another mednin would be assigned to care for him just because he was living with the Yamanaka family, and she did agree with their stated reasoning. Naruto would likely do much better in a ninja home than the orphanage. And many Yamanakas were psychologists after all, they tended to Oh. She turned to look the Hokage in the eye, then raised an eyebrow and inclined her head slightly in Inoichi's direction. When he nodded grimly in response to her silent question, she bowed her head to hide her face. She felt like screaming at the Hokage, "I told you so," because she had, on multiple occasions. She had told him ANBU was not good for Naruto, that the orphanage was not good for Naruto, but the old bastard had refused to listen. And now Naruto's situation had deteriorated so far that he needed to live with a psychologist full-time. After a few seconds of tense silence, she exhaled quietly and turned to face Naruto again. "Yes, I think living with the Yamanakas would help you become a mednin, or anything else you want to be. I think you would be very happy there." It almost didn't hurt to say that, to willingly give him away to another family. Almost. April 19th, 338 NE. 4:15 p.m. Inoichi Yamanaka's residence. "Ino-chan, can you come in here for a minute?" Kiki Yamanaka called from the living room. Despite what most people would expect from hearing the Yamanaka name, Kiku did not have blonde hair. Her light brown hair hung loosely halfway down her back, though she often wore it in a ponytail when she was working. While she had married into the Yamanaka clan, she was not a ninja nor did she have any desire to be. She had grown up working in her parents' flower shop and continued to do so even after marriage. Her husband Inoichi actively encouraged her in her efforts as he knew how much the shop meant to her, especially after her parents passed away. It was fortunate that he had. The additional income from the shop had proven to be a godsend after the tailed beast's attack and the increased mission fees that followed. Kiku also had Inoichi wrapped around her finger and knew it, though she didn't abuse that fact. Her daughter had inherited her mother's grace and charming personality, and was similarly successful in manipulating her father, along with many other people. "Coming, Kaa-chan." Ino's voice called from the upper floor, quickly followed by the rapid thumping of her feet as she ran down the stairs. She burst into the living room at full speed, nearly tripping over the table before she came to stop in front of the couch where her mother was currently seated. Even at 4 years old, Ino already had the delicate features and fair complexion that promised great beauty later in life. Her blonde hair was shoulder length and pulled into a ponytail, and she was wearing a light blue dress and sandals. "Ino, how many times have I told you not to run down the stairs?" Kiku said, her voice stern. Ino winced, then said contritely, "Sorry, Kaa-chan." Deciding it would be better to change the topic, she asked, "What did you want me for, Kaa-chan?" Kiku shook her head in exasperation, but let the issue go for the moment. "Well, your father and I had a very important talk last night, and wanted to let you know about what is going to happen." "It's not anything bad," Kiku hastened to add, seeing Ino's face begin to crumple with worry. "In fact, I think you will be very happy, but it will cause some changes." Ino quickly calmed down after her mother's reassurances, the vague, nameless fears her fledgling imagination had conjured up vanishing under her mother's soothing voice. "What's going to change? What did you and Tu-chan talk about?" she asked. "Well, you know how your Tu-chan helps people sometimes?" She nodded silently, vaguely aware that her father's job sometimes included talking to people for a long time, and that they felt better afterward. She could understand that. She always felt better when her father talked to her, so why wouldn't everyone else? "Well, there's a little boy who was hurt very badly. Remember how you felt when your arm broke, and how your Tu-chan and I helped you and made you feel better? Well, this little boy was hurt even more, and he doesn't have a Tu-chan or a Ka-chan to help him feel better," her mother said softly. She started tearing up, imagining how horrible she would have felt without her parents around when she was hurt. "That's so sad," she cried out, hoping that this story got better soon. Kiku smiled, pleased at her daughter's empathy and how well the conversation was going so far. "We think so too, which is why we have decided to help him. We want him to come live with us from now on, so that he has a Tu-chan and a Ka-chan and even a Ne-chan to help him out. I know you always wanted a little brother, and now you'll have one." Ino was surprised at this turn in the conversation, but Kiku had presented the argument well. She had picked up quite a few tricks from Inoichi over the years and understood how her daughter thought. Ino's face scrunched up thoughtfully as she mulled this new information over in her head. "He'll live with us?" "Yes, from now on." "And you'll make him feel better?" "Yes, we will." Kiku knew a little about the situation and wasn't quite as confident internally, but knew better than to express doubt right now. She hesitated for a few seconds before she blurted out her next question. "And you'll still be my Ka-chan and Tu-chan?" Ino asked, her voice uncertain. Her mother swiftly moved from the couch to kneel in front of Ino and pulled her into a tight hug. "Always, Ino-chan. We love you and wouldn't let you go for anything." Ino reveled in her mother's embrace, letting the warmth she felt wash her insecurities away. After a minute, she pulled back slightly and asked, with a sly grin on her face, "Can I make him call me Ne-chan?" Kiki giggled softly, relaxing as Ino apparently accepted the upcoming change in her life. "We'll see, honey, we'll see." Ino giggled along with her mother. "What's his name? What's he like?" she asked after she calmed down. "Well, his name is Naruto. He's really smart, and he likes to study a lot. He also has a sense of humor, though. Your Tu-chan told me about this one time when Naruto-kun was talking to his teacher, and 5:00 p.m. Konoha." Inoichi nervously ran his hand through his hair again as he and Naruto walked along the road towards his home. He knew Kiku had agreed with the idea of adopting Naruto. They both knew that was what was happening, even if the official paperwork would list the arrangement as a long-term medical treatment, but he was worried about how Ino would take it. This was all happening very fast, and he was unsure if his daughter would accept the intrusion of another child into their daily lives. He had great respect for Naruto and his burden, But if this jeopardized his relationship with his own daughter, he would call it off in a heartbeat. Hopefully things would go smoothly, though. He also understood the reason for walking through the town while under the effects of a henge, the technique disguising both himself and Naruto. While the technique wouldn't withstand close scrutiny, it was more than enough for the short walk to his home. It was much safer to delay the revelation of Naruto's survival and new placement until additional security measures were put in place in and around his home. Naruto had raised no objections when the Hokage applied the technique for him, as he lacked the training necessary to apply it himself. Inoichi glanced over at the child walking beside him. Naruto had a small smile on his face as he walked quickly, keeping up with Inoichi's longer stride. Inoichi had initially tried to hold Naruto's hand as they left ANBU HQ through one of the low-profile exits, but Naruto had refused point-blank. Inoichi had then attempted to set a slow pace in deference to Naruto's age and size, but Naruto seemed to resent the implication that he couldn't keep up and started walking quickly, actually pulling ahead of Inoichi for a time. Perhaps this display of speed and endurance was another expression of Naruto's need to prove himself as capable, even against a much older and more experienced shinobi. Come to think of it, Inoichi had never actually seen Naruto look sleepy, yes, but not tired. Was that mentioned in the reports, or? Inoichi shook his head. He was getting sidetracked from the issue at hand. Looking ahead, Inoichi could already see his house looming in the distance. He'd never felt nervous about coming home before, but the uncertain reception awaiting him had his nerves jangling. He could just picture his daughter's betrayed face staring at him accusingly, tears in her eyes. He would defend himself, but she would refuse to hear his excuses, his pleas for clemency, and she would turn her back on him, refusing to call him Yamanaka-san any longer. Wait, that wasn't Yamanaka-san, Naruto said again. Inoichi pulled himself out of his thoughts and looked at Naruto. Yes, Naruto-kun? He'd already resolved to get Naruto to call him something less formal, though from what he'd heard about the Hokage's and Shizen-sama's troubles in their efforts to do the same, he expected it would take quite a while. That was a problem for later, though. Is this our destination? Naruto asked, pointing ahead. He looked in the direction Naruto was pointing and found himself staring at the front gate of his own home only a few feet away. Yes. Yes, this is our home, Inoichi responded. Naruto cocked his head to the side as he took in the residence. Inoichi turned to look as well, trying to see his home through another person's eyes. It proved difficult, as everywhere he looked evoked memories, some sad, but most quite happy and peaceful. The two-story building was painted a pale yellow, the white columns supporting the roof of the wraparound porch providing a nice contrast to the color of the house itself. The yard surrounded the house on all sides, and from their current spot in front of the main gate a small swing set and sandbox were just visible in the backyard. The entire lot was surrounded by a low stone wall tastefully adorned with vines. What really drew the eye, however, were the flower beds scattered throughout the yard. Each flower bed had a distinct theme, yet when seen as a whole they blended together. Each group of flowers had been carefully selected to complement those around it while still providing something unique and beautiful. It was his wife's pride and joy, and the loving care with which she attended to the yard showed. Inoichi finally looked back to Naruto, who seemed to have finished his own appraisal. It's nice, he said, apparently struggling with the words. He paused for a minute, thinking, then added peaceful. Thank you, Naruto-kun. I'm glad you like it, Inoichi said. Naruto smiled at him, but it was a fake I'm smiling because I'm supposed to smile. Perhaps he didn't like it after all? Setting aside that concern for the moment, Inoichi moved the rest of the way to the house itself and entered, only dispelling the henge technique once the door had closed behind them. Kiku-chan, we're home, Inoichi called out. He could barely make out some rapid whispering from the living room. He was rather startled when Naruto's head swiveled in that direction and a surprised look crossed his face. Could Naruto make out what they were saying? None of the reports mentioned that his hearing was unusually good. Inoichi sighed and added another item to the rapidly growing list of things he needed to learn about Naruto. He was a little disturbed at just how long that list already was, and it promised to grow much longer before he was done. We're in the living room, Inoichi-kun, Kiku called out, her tone happy. Inoichi felt some of the tension drain from his shoulders. If she was happy, then Ino had taken the news well. The real test was about to begin, but it was a good sign. The Yamanaka clan had led Naruto from the small entranceway of the house into the living room. He made sure that the first thing he did once he entered the room was to look straight at Ino and give her a happy smile. Sure enough, Ino was watching him carefully and smiled back once she saw his face. She then turned to look at Naruto and immediately stiffened, her eyes wide. Inoichi began to panic as he snapped his head around to look at Naruto. What had he missed? Was Naruto scowling? Did he look unhappy? He wasn't bleeding or hurt, and his clothes were fine. What was Ino reacting to? His thoughts were interrupted when she let out a loud squeal and jumped on Naruto, hugging him with all her strength. You didn't tell me he had blonde hair. He really is like a little brother. This is great. Ino shouted happily. Naruto appeared to be enduring the treatment well, though his hands had moved as if to push Ino away from him before settling on patting her shoulder awkwardly. Inoichi staggered slightly and exchanged a disbelieving look with his wife. All their preparation and worry, and Ino focused on his hair color as the deciding factor? Kushu continued to pat the small blonde girl Ino. He reminded himself on the shoulder. He had expected a reaction similar to what he saw in the orphanage, not this joyful reception. He had not been aware that human children placed such a strong emphasis on hair color. Though come to think of it, none of the children in the orphanage had blonde hair. He heard Inoichi clear his throat expectantly, and realized he was supposed to introduce himself at this point. Right, his tone should be slightly nervous, a touch excited. Of course, that didn't mean he couldn't cheat. Hello? I'm Naruto. It's nice to meet you, Inone-chan. Her shriek of delight as he addressed her as his big sister almost deafened him, but it was worth it to make sure he was accepted quickly by the child of the household. He would like to say he deduced this aspect of Ino's personality from her earlier words in combination with Inoichi's repeated use of the phrase big sister in their conversation, but that would be a lie. He had overheard Ino's whispered conversation with her mother after he entered the house and learned just what to say to make the best impression. Kushu kept his arms around Ino as she bounced in place, beaming at everyone in the room. Inoichi glanced at him with an odd look on his face, but it soon gave way to happiness as Ino's joy permeated the room. The tension Kushu had seen build up in the walk from ANBU HQ had vanished entirely. Kushu then turned to look at the other person in the room. The mother, Kiku, he thought Inoichi had said, was watching her daughter with a bemused and happy smile. Recalling that adult females liked it when treated as though they were younger, Kushu struck again, making sure he smiled while he did so. Making a good impression would make sure he stayed. A ninja household, with its promised resources and connections, might even prove to be more useful in the long term than ANBU HQ. Yamanaka-san, you didn't tell me I would have two Nei-chans, he said, looking at the mother pointedly. Kiku blushed slightly, pleased at the compliment, while Inoichi gaped, looking at the boy as if he'd never seen him before. Inoichi didn't tell me you were such a charmer, Naruto-kun, Kiku said. I'm Ino's mother, Kiku. You can call me Ka-san too, if you'd like. So far, so good. Now, not too confident, a little shy. All right, Kiku Ka-san, he said hesitantly, moving his eyes away. Kiku smiled fondly at his supposed embarrassment, while Inoichi was watching him with another odd expression. Ino continued to bounce up and down in excitement, chattering rapidly about all the things she'd do with her new little brother. Kushu felt a pang of unease as he noticed that Ino had yet to calm down. The girl would stop before too long, he assured himself. It's not like she was that obsessed with the idea of a little brother, was it? Right. April 20th. 8:00 a.m. Hokage's Tower, Council Chambers. The council was originally scheduled to convene this morning to discuss the impending arrival of the diplomatic delegation from Kumogakure no Sado, the village hidden in the clouds. The meeting was mostly a formality to confirm that all the preparations were complete and take care of any last-minute details or problems. While that remained the official purpose for the meeting, Sarutobi, along with Dragon and his newly promoted Jounin commander Shikaku Nara, had come up with a plan to potentially expose the source of the assassination attempt on Naruto. They all agreed that despite the large number of ninja who could have potentially exposed the secret, odds were high that someone on the council had either arranged it or knew about it. At the very least, someone might let something slip and give them a lead. If this plan failed to produce results, they would regroup and consider other, more risky ideas. Once all the councilors had taken their seats, Shikaku began the meeting. The first item on our agenda for today was to discuss the preparations for the Kumo delegation, and while that remains on the list, Hokage-sama has another matter he would like to address first. Hokage-sama. Sarutobi nodded to Shikaku and then stood, clearing his throat. Esteemed councilors, as you may have heard, there was an incident 2 days ago near the market district. The investigation is ongoing, but I am prepared to release some details. It appears that an unidentified assailant approached a young child leaving the Konoha library under the pretense of assisting him in carrying the books he had borrowed. After walking with him a short distance, the assailant then fatally stabbed the young child in the heart. Sarutobi's eyes were sharp and searching as he scanned the faces in the room for their reactions. Shikaku and Dragon, along with the ANBU guards stationed around the room, were also watching closely. Cries of disgust and outrage echoed throughout the room, with Fugaku Uchiha looking especially horrified. Fugaku probably saw this as reflecting poorly on the performance of his clan's police force, Sarutobi thought. However, there were two counselors, both civilians, who for a brief moment had smiles on their faces: Naoki Taniguchi and Harumi Kondo. The desire to strike them down that very moment was surprisingly strong, but Sarutobi kept himself under control and reminded himself to focus on the bigger picture for the moment. Neither Naoki nor Harumi were supposed to know Naruto's identity, which confirmed that someone somewhere had revealed the secret. He had not noticed any of the ninja revealing anything other than the appropriate surprise and disgust, although Shibi Aburame's brow was furrowed slightly, a sign that might as well be screaming out loud for the carefully disciplined ninja. While none of the clan heads outside of Shikaku knew the identity of the supposedly murdered child for certain, it would not surprise him if the highly intelligent and logical Aburame already had strong suspicions at this point. Naoki apparently couldn't resist a bit of subtle gloating, as he spoke up before the Hokage could continue. "You said the assailant was unidentified, Hokage-sama. Does that mean he got away?" His voice was concerned and troubled, but his eyes were laughing. The Hokage grinned, his expression feral. "Oh no, I didn't mean to imply that at all. He is currently in ANBU custody undergoing a thorough interrogation. Once he has spilled everything he knows, he will undergo a public execution. Konoha will not tolerate anyone attempting to kill children." Naoki looked like someone had punched him in the gut, but he kept himself mostly under control as he slowly sat back in his chair. "That's wonderful news, Hokage-sama," he choked out. Beside him, Harumi looked pale and nervous, and kept glancing around the room as if she expected to be attacked at any moment. Amateurs. It disgusted Sarutobi that such pathetic people would dare attack Naruto. Apparently it was only now dawning on them that they personally could be in danger from their little plot. They would soon learn just how badly they had been mistaken. The rest of the council nodded grimly in agreement, although a few ninjas were looking at Naoki suspiciously. A faint buzzing could be heard from Shibi Aburame as the insects with which his family formed a symbiotic relationship reflected his agitation. One of the other civilian counselors spoke up next. "Hokage-sama, who was the murdered child?" The Hokage sighed softly. "We are still trying to locate the child's parents or guardians. At this time, we are not ready to release any information as to the child's identity. A small lie, but a necessary one for the moment. If Naruto's attackers believed they had succeeded, they would be more likely to gloat or celebrate in some fashion and thus give away their identities. Their ruse had already uncovered Naoki and Harumi as suspects, but there was no guarantee the plot ended with them, and their source still needed to be found. The deception wouldn't last for long, particularly among the ninja of the village, but it would hopefully last long enough. If there are no other questions regarding this matter, I will return the floor to Narasan to continue the meeting." After waiting a few moments for someone else to speak up, Sarutobi returned to his seat and Shikaku resumed the meeting. The discussion regarding the Kumo delegation went quickly as everyone confirmed that their individual tasks had been completed and everything was prepared for the delegation's arrival tomorrow morning. Though the treaty was primarily a ninja matter, the civilians would also be included to begin discussions regarding potential trade agreements. If everything went well, Konoha could be looking at a major boost to trade and the taxes that came with it. While the village was well on their way to recovery, funds were still tight, and the ninja especially were overworked and underpaid. That the civilian side was not feeling the pinch nearly as badly as the ninja was a cause of some tension over the past 3 years, though it hadn't moved beyond words yet. After the meeting adjourned, Shibi Aburame approached the Hokage, his insects still buzzing. The Hokage had expected Shibi to approach him, and so lingered to give him the chance. "Hokage-sama," Shibi began, his voice low. "Is it true that Naruto has been assassinated?" Sarutobi chuckled lowly. As he had thought, Shibi had worked out the supposed identity of the victim. Let's just say that reports of his demise may have been exaggerated. The buzzing noise slowly tapered off as Shibi relaxed. "I see. That is good to hear." Shibi paused, then steeled himself and continued to speak. "Though it pains me to even think it, I acknowledge the possibility that someone in my clan leaked the information regarding Naruto's identity. I am prepared to cooperate in any way you deem necessary." He bowed stiffly, awaiting the Hokage's judgment. His clan's honor was very important to Shibi, and he would not rest until his clan was cleared of any wrongdoing or the guilty party punished. He sincerely hoped the former proved to be the case. The Hokage nodded solemnly, understanding just how important this was to the Aburame clan leader. "I appreciate your cooperation in this matter, Shibi-san. Please meet with Shikaku to coordinate your efforts." After Shibi acknowledged the command with another stiff bow, the Hokage laid a friendly hand on Shibi's shoulder. "I would rest easy, however. We already have another lead, and it does not point in the direction of your clan at this time. I hope for both our sakes that remains the case." 9:45 a.m. Outside the Hokage's tower. Fugaku Uchiha's expression was stoic and proud, as it should be. He strove to maintain a dignified visage whenever he was in public, and usually even when he was among his clan. Only in his own home did he truly relax. To him, that was how a ninja should behave. His expression was stoic, but inside he was panicking. Those damned fools! He didn't supply them with Naruto's identity so they could hire a goddamned assassin. If he'd known they would try something that stupid, he would never have approached them in the first place. No amount of influence with the civilians in Konoha was worth bringing Sarutobi's wrath down on his head. He still couldn't believe Naoki was willing to go so far as to kill Naruto himself just to spite the ninja of the village. Fugaku knew that Naoki didn't really believe that Naruto was a serious threat anymore. Years of proof that the seal was functioning perfectly had taken the wind out of his sails, and he no longer called for the vessel's destruction, even in their private meetings. That change of heart was part of the reason Fugaku had been willing to reveal Naruto's identity in the first place. He expected Naoki to use the information to his advantage politically, publicly backing Naruto when he joined the ninja force and trying to form connections with a ninja practically guaranteed to be important and powerful. It galled him to know that he had misread Naoki's intentions this badly. After seeing them smile, Kami, the idiots, actually fucking smiled. He knew it would only be a matter of time until A and B were dispatched to take them into custody. After that, it was a matter of hours before they spilled everything they knew, one way or another, and A and B would be coming for him next. He needed to regain control of this situation, and fast. He smiled slightly and nodded his head in response to the greetings he received as he walked down the street towards the Uchiha compound. As the chief of the Konoha police, he was one of the most recognized ninja in the village, second only to the Hokage himself. He made sure to maintain a highly visible presence among the civilians, and his efforts had paid off. Among civilians, he was probably even more popular than the Hokage himself, and he did everything in his power to make sure that his popularity continued to grow. It would make things so much easier if, when Sarutobi finally died, though even Fugaku didn't wish that to happen too quickly, there was only one true option for his successor. Securing the unanimous support of the civilian side of the council would make sure Fugaku himself was that option. Fugaku, as the chief of police, was intimately familiar with every law in Konoha, including those for the council. While the council was intended to be mostly an advisory body, they did have certain specific duties and powers, most of which had been codified before the civilians had been allowed seats on the council. Once the village grew beyond the capacity of the ninja forces to run by themselves, the 10 seats for the elected civilian representatives had been added. Fortunately for Fugaku, no one had thought to amend the laws concerning the council's powers in the wake of this addition. The first and most commonly exercised power of the council was their review of any laws. The Hokage had a great deal of power, as he should, but if 2/3 of the council voted against a law, then the law would not be implemented. Similarly, the Hokage could call for a review of an existing law, and if 2/3 of the council found it to be unreasonable, it could be revoked or amended at the Hokage's discretion. Even the Hokage did not have the power to contradict existing law by himself, a measure the first Hokage had insisted on. The council itself could neither propose nor review existing laws on its own, and until the aftermath of the tailed beast's attack, the council had never voted against the Hokage. The second power came into play far more rarely, in the absence of the Hokage, such as when the Hokage dies or is otherwise incapacitated. The council as a whole is tasked with appointing an interim Hokage and selecting the next Hokage. Always before the Hokage had publicly chosen a successor, so the council had served a mostly ceremonial function. Sarutobi had yet to select another successor, and every day that passed increased the odds that he would pass away before doing so. Should that happen, a vote would be called to determine the next Hokage. As Fugaku would be nominated and thus ineligible to vote, there would be 21 votes, 10 civilian, 9 ninja, the ANBU commander, and the Jounin commander. Fugaku still found it ironic that Shikaku Nara would be allowed 2 votes, as he was both a clan head with a seat on the council and the Jounin commander. With the 10 civilian votes secured, Fugaku would only need 2 more votes to achieve the majority required, and he believed he was well on his way to securing those as well. After the loss of the Kayamizu and Murakami clans in the tailed beast's attack, 2 ninja seats on the council were left vacant. It had taken nearly a month for the situation within Konoha to stabilize enough for the council to turn its attention to filling those seats, and in that time another seat had been left vacant, the Senju. That had been a mess of the highest order, and Fugaku was still uncertain what exactly transpired to cause Tsunade to leave. The result was very clear, however. Tsunade Senju had left Konoha and become a missing ninja in all but name. That she was not listed in the bingo book with a bounty, and that Konoha had dispatched no hunter-nin to capture or eliminate her, he attributed to some lingering affection on Sarutobi's part. After she abandoned Konoha in the village's hour of greatest need, no one on the council was willing to defend her. If any still held some personal attachment to her, they kept it to themselves. When the vote to revoke the Senju seat came up, All the arguments centered on the contributions of the previous Senju, two of whom had served as Konoha's first and second Hokages. Not one person so much as spoke Tsunade's name during the meeting. Fugaku still felt a small glow of victory, as he remembered casting his vote to revoke the Senju seat. Not only had the vote been popular with the civilians on the council who resented Tsunade's attempted attack on Naoki Taniguchi, but the Senju and Uchiha had been the two clans who first founded Konoha. Now only the Uchiha remained. Unfortunately, there were no other clans within Konoha that met the population and service requirements to gain a permanent seat on the council. The Kurama were the closest, but fell short of the active shinobi requirement by 3 members. The law was very clear about this circumstance, and Fugaku made sure he was the one who informed the council of the required actions. A vote would be held among the remaining council members, and an active ninja in good standing would be selected to fill the seat for a period of 5 years. Said ninja must be unaffiliated with any existing seat by blood, adoption, or marriage, and must remain so during his term. If the ninja occupying the seat became ineligible for any reason and less than 2 years remained in the term, the Hokage would appoint a ninja to hold the seat. Otherwise, a vote would be held to fill the seat for the remainder of the term. At the end of the 5-year term, another survey for suitable clans would be performed and either a clan appointed to a permanent seat or a vote held for another 5-year term. Fugaku had taken great relish in pointing out that all council members voted on this matter, not just the ninja. The other ninja had objected loudly, but once the laws were reviewed they had to concede that Fugaku was correct. There was no provision stating that civilians could not vote in such matters. With 10 civilian and 12 ninja votes at the time, there was also no possibility that the council could achieve the 2/3 majority required to amend the law. When the first vote occurred, Fugaku did not have enough influence with the civilian side of the council to convince them to select candidates favorable to him, and he didn't push too hard lest his fellow ninja councilors become suspicious of him. But the first term was ending soon, and now? Now he did. 5 years was a long time, and Sarutobi was already old. Even if the Hokage survived the next 5 years, Fugaku had every intention of making sure that the next set of temporary councilors were favorable to him as well. He would continue for as long as it took. Fugaku shook himself out of his musings as he arrived home. Right now, he had a problem to deal with. He prepared to summon 2 of his most loyal clansmen, 2 who didn't mind getting their hands dirty for the betterment of the clan and the village. April 20th, 338 NE. 6:15 p.m. Hokage's office. Why is it, Dragon, the Hokage growled softly, that I find myself questioning the competence of my ANBU forces for the second time this week? Please enlighten me. The Hokage and Dragon were currently alone, even the standard squad that stood guard over the Hokage at all times dismissed for this particular meeting. Dragon was folded in half in a stiff bow, and had remained so since the Hokage first entered the room. The ANBU commander didn't dare face the Hokage at the moment, and so continued to stare at the floor, sweat dripping onto the mask that covered the ninja's face. Yes, Hokage-sama, Dragon said stiffly. It was determined that the arrest of councilors Naoki Taniguchi and Harumi Kondo should be done quietly. We also wanted them to panic and possibly expose other conspirators or vital information. I had 1 ANBU squad waiting at each of their residences to arrest them once they arrived home for the evening. We also took the opportunity to search through their records for any evidence of treason or other crimes. Unfortunately, the councilors never arrived home. Both Taniguchi and Kondo tripped while walking down a set of stairs and broke their necks, although they fell in different locations. The Hokage rubbed the bridge of his nose as he tried to keep his temper in check. It beggars belief that both of them would just happen to accidentally die just before they were arrested for treason. Did you not have ANBU squads following them? I did, Hokage-sama. And? Neither squad reported anything unusual. However, our intelligence analysts have been going over the records we retrieved from their homes, and they have found an interesting pattern. Both Taniguchi and Kondo have been meeting with the chief of police on a regular basis, and often at the same time. I questioned the squads who were following them again, and both reported that Taniguchi and Kondo were approached briefly by a police patrol after they left the council meeting. The patrol consisted of 2 ninja, both Uchiha. Uchiha, the Hokage said slowly, as if tasting the word. Has an autopsy been performed yet? Were there any traces of genjutsu? The traces were faint, but they were present, Hokage-sama, Dragon replied. The Hokage was silent for several minutes as his mind churned, the pieces falling into place and painting an ugly picture. Fugaku's ambitions were well known among ninja and civilian alike, and the popularity of the Uchiha clan in general and Fugaku in particular had risen to new levels in the wake of the tailed beast's attack. Not for the first time the Hokage cursed Madara Uchiha. Fugaku's grandfather had been an incredible ninja, nearly as powerful as the first Hokage himself, but it was his cunning and foresight that had proved the most troublesome. Madara had insisted that the Uchiha be given sole control of the internal police within Konoha as a condition for joining the village. At the time, it had seemed like a meaningless concession to a man desperate for any sort of official recognition in the wake of his failure to gain the title of Hokage. The brilliance of the move had slowly revealed itself over the years, and it seemed to be reaching fruition now, long after Madara himself had passed away. By maintaining control of the police force, the Uchiha were able to keep their weaker ninja within the walls of the village where they would be safe and gainfully employed while still registered as active ninja in good standing. While the Senju would send their ninja out into the field to die, the Uchiha would remain home, safe and sound, steadily growing their clan's numbers. The results were plain to see. The Senju, initially more powerful and numerous than the Uchiha, had been whittled down to a single female member who was nearly past childbearing age and showed absolutely no interest in continuing her clan after the death of her lover. Meanwhile, the Uchiha had grown to become the most populous and powerful clan in the village. Only the Hyuga could claim to rival the Uchiha's numbers of active ninja, and that only due to a quirk of fate which allowed the Hyuga's bloodline limit to manifest in every member without fail, while the Uchiha bloodline activated in only a third of the clan's members. Fugaku had taken this advantage even further by actively currying favor with the civilian populace. The civilians were already inclined to trust the Uchiha as a matter of course, since the Uchiha were highly visible as the core of Konoha's police force. While other ninja were fighting and dying outside Konoha's walls to protect and strengthen the village, the Uchiha would parade in front of the civilians and occasionally break up drunken brawls or arrest a thief. Despite this disparity, the average civilian, if asked to name all the ninja they knew, would likely come up with two names: Hiruzen Sarutobi and Fugaku Uchiha. Even the legendary Sannin, Sarutobi's former students, were likely to be forgotten or overlooked, especially since none of them had been seen in the village in years, if for very different reasons. Now, less than a century after the village's founding, the Uchiha were poised to take control of the entire village and never let go. Sarutobi was willing to admit to himself that, taken solely on his own merits, Fugaku could probably handle the mantle of Hokage well enough, even if he lacked a true will of fire. After Minato's death, Sarutobi despaired of ever finding another ninja who could be a true successor. In his weaker moments, he even contemplated just turning the whole wretched mess over to Fugaku now and stepping back to watch the man deal with the headaches that came with the title he was so desperate to achieve. However, his own will of fire had not weakened so much that he was willing to just abandon his post to a lesser man. He had many years left in him, plenty of time to find a more suitable candidate, or groom one from among the veteran ninja. And that was the crux of the matter, really. Fugaku, for all his skill and political acumen, was not now and would never be an acceptable candidate in Sarutobi's eyes because once Fugaku became Hokage he would never let the title pass outside of the Uchiha clan. He would make sure his older son Itachi was groomed for the position, and he would fully expect Itachi to do the same for his children. Sarutobi would readily admit that Itachi had already proven himself a genius, graduating the academy at the age of 8 after only 1 year, 4 years before most students could even hope to. Only 2 ninja had accomplished this feat prior to Itachi, Kakashi Hatake and Minato Namikaze, both of whom had gone on to become S-rank ninja before they reached the age of 20. There was another more serious problem, one that Fugaku, and indeed Madara, had likely overlooked or ignored: the perception the other ninja in the village had of the clan. Even if Itachi proved even more capable than Fugaku, that would not change the fact that the other ninja would not accept the beginning of an Uchiha dynasty within Konoha. Since so many of the clan took permanent posts within the walls of Konoha, they had alienated their fellow ninja who had no choice but to take risky missions outside the safety of Konoha. Beyond the police force, which many ninja considered a joke, there were very few postings that did not require at least some experience in the field, and all of those were limited to the intelligence divisions. No ninja who had ever met a Nara would dare underestimate the power of solid intelligence and good planning, and many owed their lives to insights and secrets uncovered by the intelligence division. Conversely, no ninja who had ever met a member of the permanent police would dare allow themselves to become that weak and arrogant, and many refused to even acknowledge them as active ninja. The last problem with the Uchiha was their bloodline limit. Even with 2/3 of the clan never activating it, the clan as a whole was inordinately proud of the Sharingan, the so-called copy wheel eye. Once awakened, the Sharingan increased the effectiveness of an Uchiha ninja many times over, and that was without considering its more advanced uses and abilities. Even at its most basic level, the Sharingan increased the observational abilities of a ninja tenfold, allowing the user to pick up on subtle details and clues that they would miss otherwise. As the Sharingan matured, the user could track fast-moving objects with ease and even predict an opponent's actions based on the subtle tensing and shifting of their bodies. When fully matured, the user could actually copy any techniques they observed perfectly and reproduce them on command at any point thereafter. The average ninja would be willing to give nearly anything to obtain even one of those abilities, and the Uchiha got all of those abilities and more for simply being born. What concerned Sarutobi at the moment, however, was the last ability of the Sharingan, its ability to detect and even cast genjutsu, or illusion techniques. A skilled user could implant subtle genjutsu merely by making eye contact, and the technique would be nearly imperceptible to both the target and anyone observing. With the revelation of Fugaku's close involvement with the two counselors and their all too convenient deaths, it appeared genjutsu had been used to cause the accidental demise of the two counselors. And of course, it would be absolutely impossible to prove that the Uchiha had anything to do with it. Chakra signatures were fragile things to begin with, and it was nearly impossible to trace a genjutsu signature back to the caster at the best of times. Hours after the fact and with the death of the subject, it would be impossible. Of course, just because he couldn't prove it now didn't mean he couldn't put this information to good use. Dragon, I want the Uchiha in general and Fugaku in particular under observation at all times. If he meets with someone, I want to know who, why, and for how long. If he sends a message, I want a copy on my desk before he's done writing. If he so much as sneezes, I want to know about it before he's done wiping his nose. Understood? The Hokage's voice was calm and even, but the force behind his words was unmistakable. Dragon knew better than to protest the difficulty of keeping a ninja of Fugaku's caliber under such close watch. Oh, and Dragon? I think all of ANBU needs a little refresher course to keep them on their toes. Work out the schedule with Guy, but I want all of you, and that includes you, to undergo an intense training session. I have to allow my ANBU the chance to keep their skills sharp, now don't I? Dragon gulped, paling at the prospect of one of Guy's infamous training sessions. Hawk and Cat had already begun their training, and at the end of every day they were a quivering pile of bruises and pain, nearly crying at the prospect of waking up the next day to begin again. Yes, Hokage-sama, Dragon said. April 21st, 338 NE. 9:30 AM. Konoha's northern gates. Shikaku Nara hated getting up early. He hated getting up at all, in fact, finding mornings in general too troublesome to deal with. But his wife made sure that he would regret it if he was not out of bed by a time she deemed acceptable. He attributed her insistence that noon was not acceptable to the general insanity of the female condition. She had not been amused when he shared that particular insight. He let a small smile play across his lightly scarred face as he recalled the argument that had caused, or more specifically the mutually satisfying resolution to that argument. Most people didn't understand why someone so intelligent would say such stupid things where his wife could hear. Most people also didn't understand just how enjoyable the bit that came after the arguing was. He was pretty sure Yoshino knew that he started those arguments on purpose, but she certainly wasn't complaining either. He shook his head and returned his attention to the procession that was slowly approaching the large, open gates that led into Konoha. As the Jounin commander, he was deemed the most suitable representative to greet the Kumo delegation when they arrived. Having the Hokage greet them personally when the Reikage was not part of the delegation would be seen as weak on Konoha's part, but as Kumo's Jounin commander was part of the delegation, anything less than his counterpart would be an insult. Shikaku wondered again why he had agreed to accept the role of Jounin commander when Kensuke stepped down from the position. He knew that it was largely a thankless job that involved lots of stress and paperwork and very little benefit. Oh, right. He was the best candidate, and knew just how important a skilled Jounin commander was to the continued safety of Konoha. And Yoshino threatened to make him sleep on the couch if he turned down the offer. Troublesome. He straightened from his customary slouch as the delegation finally reached the gates, his eyes sharp as he studied the group. He quickly noted that every single one of the 10 members of the delegation were ninja, and he suspected, given their age, the way they moved, and their general demeanor, that each was at least an A-rank threat. It seemed Kumo was taking this opportunity to show off a bit, subtly highlighting the fact that they had that many powerful ninja to waste on a diplomatic mission that required no particular skill. Even as he settled on that as the most likely scenario, his mind was sorting and ranking several other scenarios which called for the skills and power of 10 veteran ninja, the potential assassination of the Hokage foremost among them in risk, if not in likelihood. Kumo and Konoha had been on opposite sides in the Third Shinobi War, but their clashes were infrequent and the losses between the villages light. Light enough that peaceful relations had resumed less than a year after the end of the war, a stark contrast to the outright hatred IWA still held for Konoha. Those peaceful relations had led to the possibility of an actual alliance between the two villages and the purpose of the delegation's visit this week. Konoha's Jounin commander stepped forward to meet the leader of the Kumo delegation, a tall, thickly muscled man by the name of Katsuo Maruyama. Maruyama wore Kumo's standard Jounin outfit, a dark blue flak vest, a mesh undershirt with no sleeves, black pants fashioned of a warm, thick material the exact composition of which was a closely held secret, and black combat boots. A large sword was strapped to his back, and various pouches filled with gear festooned his body. His arms were covered in scars, to the extent that he had less unmarked flesh than he did scar tissue. His face was unmarked, however, and his thick jaw and brown eyes were currently set in a carefully neutral expression. Shikaka looked much smaller and ill-equipped in comparison. He wore Konoha's version of the standard jounin outfit. The flak vest was a dark green, the mesh shirt had sleeves that stopped halfway down his biceps, the boots were replaced by sandals, and the pants were thinner and fashioned of a different material, but the outfit was otherwise identical. He only had 3 pouches on his person and no visible weapons, and he stood a full head shorter than his counterpart. His frame also lacked the bulging muscles of the Kumo ninja. The overall effect made Shikaka seem like a child compared to the Kumo ninja, which he figured was the entire purpose. He hated posturing, it was too troublesome to deal with. Fortunately, it was also too troublesome to act intimidated when he was already close enough to immobilize the entire delegation before they had a chance to respond. Greetings. I am Shikaka Nara, Jounin Commander. On behalf of Hiruzen Sarutobi, 3rd Hokage of Konohagakure no Sato, I welcome you to the village and bid you a peaceful and productive stay, Shikaku intoned formally. Katsuo stared at him for a long moment, looking for something and appearing slightly disappointed when he didn't find it. Nara, the shadow-wielding clan, he said finally. His eyes flicked downward, taking in their location. Due to the position of the sun, the entire delegation was bathed in the shadow of the tall gates. Katsuo's eyes narrowed slightly, but he gave no other reaction. The other members of the delegation shifted uncertainly as they heard Katsuo's words and also noted their location. We have heard many tales of your exploits in Kumo. Of that Shikaka had no doubt. Kumo technically had the largest force of active ninja in the elemental nations, but were only considered the 3rd most powerful of the 5 great villages. Their relative weakness, so Kumo believed, was due to the very small numbers of bloodline users in their village. Kirigakure no Sato actually had the most registered bloodline limits of any village, but most of their bloodlines were of limited utility. They still managed to maintain a reputation as the 2nd strongest village based on the prowess of the Kagaya and Yuki clans, along with their infamous 7 swordsmen. Konoha itself was acknowledged by all as the strongest village, and it was due in part to the power and versatility of their bloodline users, exemplified by the Hyuga and Uchiha clans. Kumo made no attempt to hide their interest in recruiting bloodline users, although so far they had failed to find any new bloodlines or lure a clan away from another village. Shikaka had no doubt that their interest in Konoha stemmed from their interest in Konoha's bloodlines and that Kumo hoped to lure a clan, or at least a clan member, away from the village in some fashion. However, their previous attempts had been relatively benign and Kumo in general had a reputation for straightforward and honest dealings, so the intelligence division rated the likelihood of a forceful attempt to be low. Looking at the assembled Kumo ninja before him, however, Shikaka shifted the odds of that approach a little higher, if still unlikely. I too have heard of you, Maruyama-san. They say you once killed 3 ninja with a single swing of your sword, Shikaka replied, allowing a bit of his usual lazy tone to leak into his voice. Maruyama grinned widely, revealing shiny white teeth. It was 4, he said. He appeared to be completely serious. Shikaka nodded slightly, accepting the correction without comment. He knew it really was 4, a Konoha informant had actually witnessed the event. Now he also knew Maruyama was a braggart, and was willing to give away information in order to maintain or enhance his own reputation. Useful information to have, and he would put it to good use in the coming negotiations. If you will follow me, I will escort you to your hotel. We have reserved the entire 3rd floor of the floating leaf for your use during your stay, and I hope you will find it to your liking. Once you have settled in, I will escort you to the Hokage's tower for the first meeting at noon. Maruyama nodded sharply. Very well. Lead the way, Nara-san. April 23 RD. 2:15 p.m. Yamanaka Residence. Come on, Naruto. I promised Shika and Chuji I would introduce them to my new little brother. We can go visit them and be back before anyone even knows we're gone. Ino whined, pulling softly at Naruto's arm. Naruto steadfastly refused to move. Yamanaka-san was very clear that I was not to leave the premises for any reason until told otherwise. I believe he was worried that I would be recognized, Naruto said evenly. Ino sighed. She was very happy she had a little brother now, but she had already noted that he had a disturbing tendency to follow the rules. She frowned slightly, recalling her conversation with her father the first evening after Naruto had come to live with their family. Two-chan? Ino asked softly. She was technically supposed to be in bed right now, but she couldn't sleep while this question burned in her head. Naruto-kun doesn't look like he was hurt. After I broke my arm, I had to wear that arm thing for forever. Why doesn't he have one of those? Her father sighed, but sat up in his chair and motioned for her to come closer. When she was close enough, he picked her up and plopped her down in his lap. Well, sweetie, There are many different kinds of hurts. Sometimes the hurts are easy to fix, like your arm, even if it's not fun while that happens. Other hurts you can't see, but they can be just as bad or worse, and can take a long time to fix. Naruto has one of those kinds of hurts. It's on the inside, and it's going to take Daddy a very long time to help him. Oh, Ino said quietly. How is he hurt? He didn't answer for several seconds, and she was afraid she had asked a bad question somehow. Before she could say anything, however, he finally replied. He believes that he has to act like an adult, all the time. He doesn't think he's allowed to have fun, or act like a child, or even just relax. Part of how I'm going to help him is to let him know it's alright just to be a kid. I'm hoping you can help me with that. He could really use a friend, and I know you would be a wonderful friend. And an even better older sister, of course, he chuckled. Ino didn't fully understand the explanation, but she got the important parts. Have fun, help him act like a kid, be an older sister. She could do that. She could definitely do that. Well, here was a perfect opportunity to show her little brother how to have fun. Besides, little brothers were supposed to listen to their older sisters, so really she was fixing two problems at once. TSK, little brother. You should know better than to question your older sister. Kids are expected to break the rules sometimes, it's practically a rule of its own. Deciding to ignore the irony of her previous statement, she moved on quickly. And besides, if being recognized is the problem, you just have to wear a disguise. She clapped her hands excitedly. I have the perfect one in mind. I'm not wearing a dress, Naruto said immediately. Ino waved her hand airily. It didn't even look good on you. Your hair isn't long enough yet. Yet? Naruto asked, his tone faintly incredulous. Anyway, that's not what I had in mind. I've got a much better idea than that. 3:30 p.m. Nara compound. Shikamaru Nara was lying on his back, staring up at the sky as the clouds passed overhead. The familiar crunch of a potato chip and the crumple of the bag which contained them let him know that his best friend, Chuji Akimichi, was sitting next to him. Rabbit, Shikamaru said lazily. Another crunch. Duck. Another crunch. Table. Another crunch. A loud rustle as the bag was balled up and tossed aside and a new one opened. Roast chicken. Another crunch. Deer. Another crunch. Ino. A tree. Wait, what? Shikamaru quickly sat up and turned to look at Chuji. Chuji simply pointed off into the distance towards the entrance to the Nara compound. Shikamaru squinted. Sure enough, he could make out Ino and some other kid walking towards them. Ino was wearing a large sun hat that almost swallowed her entire head. She kept pushing it up out of the way as she stomped towards them, apparently having trouble seeing in front of her as it slid down her face. Behind her trailed another kid, this one wearing a bandana and sunglasses in what Shikamaru found to be such a blatantly obvious attempt to hide his identity that it was almost subtle. Given that Ino most likely came up with it, however, he settled on just blatantly obvious. Troublesome, Shikamaru muttered, and flopped back down on his back. He had already picked up his father's habit of saying that word, which had led to an argument between his mom and dad where she was actually angry instead of her usual amused angry. Ino didn't seem to appreciate his use of the word too much either, though Chuji didn't mind at all. That was why Chuji was his best friend instead of Ino. Well, one of the reasons anyway. As Ino continued to make her way towards them, Shikamaru began to make out what she was saying. Honestly, like I haven't been here loads of times before. And they were laughing. At us. Ino said. Technically, I think they were just laughing at you. They really didn't know who I was, the other kid replied. Not helping, Ino yelled. Sorry, Nechan, the kid said. Shikamaru didn't think he sounded all that sorry, though. He sounded more like he wanted to laugh himself. So this was the infamous little brother Ino had been raving about yesterday. Shikamaru was pretty sure they were both supposed to stay at the Yamanaka residence, although he was not at all surprised to learn that Ino had slipped out. Ino came to a stop in front of Shikamaru and Chuji, pulling the hat off her head as she stared at them for a long moment. Shikamaru still hadn't moved from his position. He was wearing a light blue shirt and black pants, and his black hair was pulled up into a spiky ponytail that stuck up from the back of his head in an imitation of his father's hairstyle, a style most people referred to as the pineapple. Chuji was wearing a green and white jacket with blue pants. His hair stuck up wildly in all directions and he had red swirl marks tattooed on both cheeks. He spared a quick wave to Ino and her companion before he returned to consuming his potato chips, already halfway through the freshly opened bag. Honestly, could you two be any lazier? You're supposed to at least stand up when a lady is present, you know, Ino said. Chuji looked vaguely guilty, but Shikamaru just snorted. When one shows up, let me know and I'll think about it. Why you? Ino sputtered indignantly. Shikamaru just chuckled to himself, and Chuji bit off another potato chip to cover up his own laugh. Anyway, aren't you going to introduce us? Shikamaru said, finally sitting up again as he looked at Ino's companion. Ino took a moment to recover, but she quickly brightened. Right. Shika, Chuji, this is my new little brother, Naruto. Naruto, the lazy one on the ground, is Shikamaru Nara, and the one eating chips is Chuji Akimichi. The newly introduced Naruto pulled off the sunglasses and bandana and then smiled at the two kids. Shikamaru and Chuji were both surprised to see blonde hair and blue eyes, and for a moment they wondered if Naruto really was Ino's brother. Blonde hair was highly unusual in Konoha, and Naruto's eyes were only a few shades off from Ino's. Shikamaru quickly dismissed that idea, but focused on the name. Naruto, I've heard that name before. My dad was talking about you. Something about ridiculous test scores. Naruto smirked slightly. I wouldn't say ridiculous, he said. Ino had no such problem. Yep. Totally ridiculous. I bet he's even smarter than you, Shika. Oh? You wouldn't happen to play shogi, would you? Shikamaru asked. His dad had taught him how to play the game, and while Chuji and Ino had shown no interest, Shikamaru still wanted to find someone to play against on a regular basis. His dad was perfectly willing to play, of course, but their relative skill levels were still too far apart for it to be anything other than a teaching exercise. Naruto hummed thoughtfully. I have heard of it, but I've never gotten the chance to play. If you want to show me the rules, I'm willing. Shikamaru grinned, and hopped to his feet with far more alacrity than most would expect him to be capable of. Follow me, he said, and moved off towards his house. Chuji pulled himself to his feet and quickly followed. Ino grinned and pulled Naruto along with her. Come on, it's time someone showed Shikamaru up, and you, little brother, are the perfect one for the job. 2 hours later, Ino was still crowing in delight. Ha! I told you. To be fair, Nei-chan, I only won once, Naruto said. Shikamaru just shook his head, still shocked by how quickly Naruto had picked up the game. And you just started playing. I've been playing with my dad for months now. You're really good. Shikamaru grinned, excitement shining in his eyes. I can still beat you though. Again? Oh, I think you've played enough for today, don't you? A new voice said. Ino paled dramatically and Chuji almost choked on his chip. Shikamaru just shook his head with a muttered troublesome. Kiki Yamanaka stood tapping her foot impatiently in the door frame. And just what, little lady, did you think you were doing sneaking out of the house in the middle of the day, And taking Naruto-kun along with you, no less. Naruto stepped bravely into the line of fire. I thought it was a rule that children were expected to break the rules on occasion, Kikuka-san? Naruto asked. Ino squeaked when Kiku turned to glare in her direction. Not helping. April 24th, 338 NE. -1:00 p.m. Yamanaka residence. Inoichi's office was situated on the ground floor of his home, tucked into a quiet corner. The furniture inside the office emphasized comfort over aesthetic appeal, and the decorations consisted of simple paintings of forest scenes from around Konoha with the occasional knickknack that held some personal significance to Inoichi. His desk was well worn but also well cared for, the inevitable nicks and scrapes picked up over the years serving to make it seem homely rather than broken down. There were 3 chairs in the room, 1 placed behind the desk and 2 placed in front of the desk, currently positioned to face each other. Naruto was already perched on one of those chairs, his feet not quite reaching the floor, when Inoichi closed the door, activated the privacy seals built into the room, and then settled into the chair across from Naruto. He had a few pieces of paper and a pencil prepared to take notes during the session. Now, Naruto, before we begin, I want you to understand that, while these sessions are required, if at any time you feel uncomfortable or don't want to answer a question, we can cut the session short or move to a different topic. These sessions will continue for as long as needed, and I don't want you to feel pressured into anything. Okay? Naruto nodded. He had yet to say anything since he first entered the room. Inoichi let out a slow breath. He sincerely wanted to help Naruto, but he wasn't looking forward to seeing just how deeply Konoha's resident Jinchuriki had been scarred by his time in ANBU HQ. The pieces he was already aware of: the emotional detachment, the complete lack of concern for his own safety, the obsession with proving himself, were bad enough. Right then, let's start with something recent, shall we? Naruto cocked his head a little to the side and looked at him curiously but remained silent. I understand you and Ino snuck out to the Nara compound yesterday. Inoichi stopped there, curious to see how Naruto would respond to the open-ended statement. He didn't have to wait long. I apologize for disobeying your instructions, Yamanaka-san. However, with the disguise I believe the risk of exposure to be minimal. Inoichi kept his face calm and pleasantly curious, suppressing his wince. Though expected, it was painful to know that Naruto still viewed the situation as a mission. His continued insistence on calling him Yamanaka-san despite his easy manner with Ino and Kiku showed that Naruto viewed Inoichi as a superior officer rather than a parental figure. These sessions probably weren't going to help that particular issue either. As far as the disguise goes, you are correct. No one recognized you as Naruto, or even paid you and Ino any particular attention. You appeared as simply two children pretending to be ninja. Inoichi reassured him. However, what made you decide to risk it at all? Naruto shifted slightly, a small sign of nervousness or discomfort.